So it's mad. But back to your pessimism thing. So I've just wrote about this in my newsletter, actually, because I've read, when I was in Costa Rica, I read, oh my God, have you read Matt Ridley's The Rational Optimist?
Yes.
Such a good book.
A very, very interesting
good book.
Yeah.
And in food and drink specifically, or brands, there's like a lot of things to be pessimistic about, because you've got
cost of living crisis, rates crisis,
supermarkets not taking cost price increases.
Yep.
Because they've got the power.
Yes.
And there was this kind of undercurrent of pessimism going around my kind of small industry. And when I read that book, it makes you kind of, I think what he says, which is really interesting, when you zoom in, all you see is what I kind of took from it is, zoom in, all you see is pessimism. But when you zoom out, all you see is optimism. Because over 50, 60, 70 years, it's like, well, now there's podcasts.
Well, it's funny you mention this, because there's a generalization, but nonetheless true, which is that bad news is fast and good news is slow.
Yes.
And if you look at the food and drink, hotel, hospitality and entertainment sector and compare it with my childhood, the comparison's almost laughable, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, the hospitality sector in the UK, outside London and a few big cities, was pretty dismal. People ate out incredibly infrequently. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for fairly prosperous people of our acquaintance in the 1970s. They'd probably go out for a meal. It's kind of wedding anniversary stuff. You know, it was literally special occasion stuff. And, you know, I mean, this sounds bizarre, but not really for cost-saving reasons. When you travelled on the train, you took sandwiches with you because you couldn't depend on getting anything edible on your trip. And so, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you zoom out, but there's an equal thing, which is if you zoom in, if you ask people, how happy are you with your life in Sevenoaks, Oxted, Tunbridge Wells, whatever, okay? Generally, people are pretty happy. And then you ask them, how are you happy? Are you happy with the state of the world? They become completely miserable. Now, most of our lives are experienced locally. So if we're happy locally, which is how we really judged our happiness until, you know, the mass media age, you should be reasonably happy. You know, if you're happy with your life where you live and with the people around you, you know, what's actually happening on the other side of the world shouldn't really bother you all that much.
The kind of the local global thing is fascinating. I think there's a Naval Ravikant quote, which is he talks about kind of right at your core, in like immediate family, everyone's a socialist. And then I don't know if you know that quote.
Yes, no, it's actually a guy. It's two brothers called Graham. I've heard it, which is that it's at the national level, I'm a libertarian.
Yes.
At the state level, I'm a Republican.
Yes.
At the town level, I'm a socialist. I think. No, I'm a Democrat. In my family, I'm a socialist, and with my dog, I'm a communist.
Yes, yeah. That's the quote, which is just I think it kind of plays on that.
And by the way, I mean there's a fundamental inherent problem in humanity, which is, to use Jonathan Haidt's phrase, we're 90% chimp, 10% bee. In other words, we're not a social species like bees or termites or ants, okay? We don't subordinate our interests entirely to the whole. We're selfish, rivalrous, you know, we genetically, we compete. Yeah. But at the same time, we're sort of, pro-social, if not eusocial. And as a consequence, we have these elements of cooperation and we have these elements of selfishness, which will always be in conflict. But, you know, in a sense, you know, as humans, we're not really one thing or the other. We're not an entire, you know, I suppose dogs probably have the same problem to some extent. But we're not entirely collective, and we're not entirely individualistic.
What, I don't understand the bee bit of that.
Oh, bees are social insects. So effectively, it's only the queen who reproduces, and the entire, what you might call, it's optimized around the survival, reproduction and growth of the hive, as it were, or the nest, not around the individual bee. I can't remember why it is. It's because of something called, I think, haploid genetics, where all bees are very close relatives of other bees. Yeah. So the genetic prospects of your fellow bees are very closely tied to your own. So it makes possible an extent to which, in evolutionary terms, you can subordinate your individual interests to the interests of the collective. So there's a famous story about E.O. Wilson, who was the world's sort of leading expert on ants. And he was also a very brilliant evolutionary biologist. He died fairly recently. And the story goes that he sat down at dinner with a Marxist who went on a long rambling discussion of what Marxism was about. And E.O. Wilson replied with a single sentence, beautiful theory, wrong species, which is quite interesting. That we are, there will always be this tension about what is collective, what is best done collectively in the collective interest, and where does that diverge from the individual interest. And in a sense, it's probably that very divide that makes us successful as a species, and that we have elements of both. We can cooperate to an extraordinary extent if you look at efforts like, World War II, where we more or less, people were, whether this is still true, but people were content, in the case of my wife's grandparents, to be posted in the army and not see their wives and families for 4 years.
Have you seen the new documentary on Netflix about the World War II not the one that's in colour? It came out just before Christmas. I struggle to watch TV. I'm more like ADHD YouTube kind of down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. But once you get YouTube Premium, actually, about 50% of your viewing becomes YouTube.
Oh, and also I had lost my credit card, so I got a new credit card, and I just was lazy about uploading it, and I realised how much pain it caused me when all the adverts started coming back up. I was like, oh my God.
I spoke to YouTube. This is very common that people because YouTube Premium in a way is the least logical thing to subscribe to, because all content is available for free. It just has advertising. That's not true of Netflix, not true of Amazon, etc. Maybe true. Maybe everything on Amazon is available at a price, but it's quite a high price for a series. And so YouTube is the one that people often most readily cancel. And then what happens is they cancel, and then very rapidly they suddenly remember how annoying it was, and then they rejoin. So it's quite common to have people who dip out of it.
The quote is, you only realize the benefit of meditation when you stop. It's the same thing. So you only realize the beauty.
Probably true of therapy as well.
Yeah, 100%. I want to go back to the humanity, collective versus individual, and the war thing. What I was saying about this documentary. As I said, I struggled to watch TV. I was on this horizontal on the sofa yesterday for like 6 hours.
YouTube binge.
No. On this documentary.
Oh, it's Netflix.
Yeah, it's all about, but it shows the collectivism, and you're watching this colour footage of D-Day, and you're just thinking, how is that? It shed shivers up me. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But then, as you say, when there's the collectivism and the humanity part of it, when it pulls together, is I think it touches upon what you were saying earlier about that kind of where we sit in the individual versus collective.
No, and there are people who question whether we've become so individualistic and so sort of solipsistic as a culture, so obsessed with our own individual take on the world, that sort of heroic collective efforts like fighting World War II. Now, you might argue there are good aspects to that, like maybe not fighting World War I, by the way.
Yeah.
And we can debate that endlessly. I mean, no one really knows whether it was a mistake or not. But, those heroic collective endeavors, are they still possible in a world which, in a sense, doesn't really have consensus anymore on many things? Or in a media environment where, in a sense, there is quite a sensible middle-of-the-road consensus on many questions, and yet, strangely, all the attention goes to the people who are dissenting.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Honestly, means the absolute world to me. I'd be so grateful for a small favour, please. It is so hard growing a YouTube channel. It is so bloody hard. If you please enjoy these videos, just click the subscribe button. More subscribers equals bigger guests equals better conversations, and hopefully you can learn more as you build your food and drink brand. Thank you so much.
So, you have this strange thing. I even tried it as an experiment, which is try going on Twitter and expressing a middle-of-the-road opinion. In other words, a qualified opinion with which most people could sensibly agree. And I tried sentences like, I'm really fond of Piers Morgan in small doses. You can try the same of, say, Jordan Peterson, who I quite like in reasonable doses, but I wouldn't want to become that invested in a point of view. Okay. And the strange thing is, nobody responds to that opinion on Twitter. Middle of the road opinion. It doesn't garner any response. It doesn't get retweeted. It doesn't get replied to. But also, stranger still, you feel really weird writing it. You know, as you type and press send, you feel slightly ridiculous. That Twitter opinions are supposed to be kind of the equivalent of a kind of bitch slap or or a highly contrarian position. And when you write something seemingly banal, not only does it get no attention and no traction, and so you do have a very strange media world in which opinions which are to some extent ridiculous effectively outcompete, in an evolutionary sense, opinions which are moderate and perfectly sensible.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, our opinion, you know, we mentioned this, I think, on the last podcast, which is a perfectly sane opinion on Starbucks is, I don't think it's the last word on coffee, but equally, I'm quite glad there's a lot of them around
closer to you.
because I can always get a pretty good coffee anywhere I want to go.
Yeah.
But that opinion doesn't gain traction in a social media environment where people just go, I hate it, or I love it. And so we live in this sort of slightly weird Marmite world.
Yeah, you can't, nothing, even as brands now, in terms of putting this like through brand, you've got to stand for something. Like it's kind of almost like it spawns out of that social media. It's just like, who can be the most, there was a piece about this. I don't know if you saw, if you heard of the brands Surreal and Days. One's alcohol-free beer and one's like protein cereal.
That's right.
And they've done this. I think their marketing is absolutely genius. I think they've done a great job, and it's all very tongue-in-cheek. So I think the guy came from Innocent as in their marketing director, but it's all like they'll do like kind of what I'm wearing now. They'll be like, does every entrepreneur in London have to wear this? And I'll do a photo shoot dressed like this. It's a piss take. I think it's hilarious. But then, and it's divisive, but I think the best marketing and the best anything is divisive. I think otherwise you become like a vapid, vanilla, just meh. And anyway, so some reporter got hold of it for the grocer and wrote this piece, and he'd done some like research. I just thought it was a fucking stupid article, but he's basically saying, that one of their things was, they'd done this billboard saying, look, Dad, I'd asked for a tenner, look at me now. They just got into Sainsbury's. Something like that. Very like...
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Lovely. Anyway, some guy's gone into it and looked up, and he's just like, yeah, your dad's a gazillion now, something like that. But and straight away, everyone's piled in.
Yes.
Piled in with... And as you say, it's either so... It's extremes. It's Marmite. It's either... Challenger brands and FMCG is built for like rich kids who can actually afford to take these risks and set up these businesses. This side, the other side is, it's not built for working class people. And I agree. It's kind of in the middle. It's like, yeah, these kids, their dad may be super rich, but they've still worked their bollocks off.
They've still created something.
Yeah, they've still created something, and they're still trying to do something. So, but as you say,
please God, we might have more people.
Yeah, but
like
everyone wants everything in every kind of and this is just talking about this specific niche. But it's like everything has to be binary these days. Nothing can be, as you say, if you take a walk down the middle and say Piers Morgan in small doses, you feel like a weirdo.
I think what comes out of that is that a fundamental, I mean, you will have seen him on the podcast circuit, Rob Henderson.
Yes,
K. Henderson.
I was listening to him last night on Chris Williams.
A brilliant guy, the coiner of the phrase luxury beliefs. And there's an additional take I'll have on that, which is that people...
what could you define?
Yes, I ought to explain this. So Rob's thesis, he grew up in foster homes in Los Angeles. He's just published a book, which I really recommend. It's actually a bestseller in the US already, called Troubled, about his childhood. And he effectively had I think has only a couple of memories of his mother. Don't think he ever knew his biological father. Ended up being fostered, and fostered in turn in a slightly dysfunctional home. And I think, Rob would probably agree when I said that he got his shit together by joining the USAF to some extent, and then ended up going to Yale and then on
USAF
to Cambridge.
Air Force.
US Air Force.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting points of the book is that the stability of your home background has a bigger determinant on your future success. This is not, by the way, I want to be absolutely clear about this. This isn't destiny, okay? It's simply statistics. But if you look at statistics, then generally people's life outcomes are more predicated on the kind of stability of their family background than on family wealth or on education. And yet, what Rob noticed is that when he got to Yale, it was fashionable to say, I think marriage is just a social construct, and, I think people should be free to, live in, open partnerships with, polyamory and so on, Now, those people themselves didn't actually adopt those behaviors, but it was fashionable to advocate for them.
Yeah.
And he argued that this was, and he coined the phrase effectively, fashionable beliefs, in that there were beliefs that people held not because they really believed in them or that there was empirical evidence that these beliefs were indeed true or useful, but simply because it raised your status holding that belief.
Wow. Yeah.
There are certain beliefs. It's very interesting. If you talk, for example, on the question of cannabis legalization, okay? Yeah. Now, by definition, if you've got into Yale, okay, you're probably not a stoner and you don't have a major problem with drugs. Because if you did have a major problem with drugs, you probably wouldn't have got there. But it's very fashionable for people who've got there who don't have a problem to go, it should all be decriminalized and blah, blah, blah. Simply because that's a belief which has become almost arbitrarily fashionable. And so you cleave to the beliefs that high status people tend to have, regardless of anything else, simply because they make you look good and feel good.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting to me is that to some extent the political left might have taken a wrong turn here, because if your principal motivation is the redistribution of wealth and resources, okay, there are ways psychologically where you can get rich people to give their money to poorer people and still feel good about it. Okay, there are all sorts of psychological tricks. I mean, that's philanthropy, after all. That's the Gates Foundation at an extreme level, but it's also paying tax, paying duties. Airlines have worked out ways in which rich people pay considerably more to fly to the same destination than poor people. There are lots of ways in which you can separate the wealthy from their money without making them feel bad. But there's no way you can remove someone's or reduce someone's status and still leave them feeling better. That mechanism just doesn't exist, in my opinion. So by turning politics into a status war between tribes, where each group seeks in many ways to essentially promote policies and beliefs which make their own group look and feel good, and which perhaps demonstrate their commitment to a group that holds those beliefs, and thereby diminishing the status of people who disagree with you, you'll never change anybody's mind. Now, if you look at advertising, you can look at all the world's advertising. You will not see a single, for example, advertisement from Ford going, if you drive a GM car, you're a moron. Okay. Now, I'm sure it's been tried. In fact, I know it was tried, but I think it never ran. It was in the very late days of Bill Bernbach, I think, where they kind of showed monkeys drinking other brands of beer. And that was an ad which Bernbach himself killed, because he said, what we're trying to do is to win over our competitors' drinkers, and you're portraying them as apes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can't change people's minds by diminishing their status. Okay. I mean, the least persuasive message you can possibly construct is effectively, I am right and you're wrong, you dumb piece of shit. Okay. It's not persuasive. In many ways, if you want to persuade people, you do the opposite. You practice flattery, or you do things that elevate their status or make them feel good about doing something. And as I said, you can make people feel good about surrendering money and resources and time. Okay, and all sorts of voluntary activity goes on in life. We've got evolutionary mechanisms for that. What we haven't got, as far as I can see, is any evolutionary mechanism by which I can actually reduce my status and feel good about it.
Have you heard of Will Storr's Status game?
Yeah, I've read it. It's fantastic.
I've the science of storytelling the status game has
and his point is
arrived.
absolutely fair, which is that this is where, of course, great restaurants aren't always about food.
100%.
Okay, it's about, in particular in places like New York. I find it a bit irritating in New York. You say, where are you going this evening? You name the restaurant. They go, oh, that was so last year. And you go, well, is the food any good? Because I'm not really interested in whether it's last year or this year. But you have this kind of weird I guess it's a positive feedback effect where places just become hyper fashionable for a time and then basically hit a peak and fall off. I think London and the UK is less guilty of that. Generally, a good restaurant can remain a good restaurant for decades much more easily here.
I think social media is what pulls gasoline on the status and the beginnings of the status fire, because it's like, I think what will
actually, when I said, I think I said fashionable beliefs, he actually calls them luxury beliefs.
Luxury beliefs, fashionable beliefs, luxury beliefs.
Yeah.
But I think putting this again into kind of food and drink, the ultimate, as you said, you can't say you buy a Ford because you're a fucking moron. Yeah. But where I think this has almost gone to the next level is, those vegan meat brands.
Yes.
Who have their way of almost saying it is, we're going to we're not going to be like tofu or like tofu. What's the other one? Tempeh, which is like a kind of.
I know exactly.
Do you know exactly what it is?
Yeah.
They're going to say we are in terms of this binary piece we were talking about earlier. It's like we are bacon. We are, and it's almost saying
you had of course the brand which I think is now owned by Unilever called the Vegetarian Butcher. Yeah. You had a brilliant branding effort in Beyond Meat, which was effectively saying this isn't a compromise, this isn't actually a substitute for meat, it's actually meatier than meat itself.
Yeah.
And that's a very clever branding. In a sense, Tesla very cleverly did it with electric cars because it had always been assumed that an electric car was a kind of compromise. That it was slower, it had lower range, that's kind of inevitable, at least at this stage. But, it had, that you bought an electric car entirely as an act of self-sacrifice to benefit the planet. And Tesla comes along with a car which is basically a saloon car which has the performance of a supercar.
Yeah.
Okay. Literally, it squares the circle, if you like. It actually says this isn't a contradiction at all. There's actually no compromise required when you have an electric car. You can have an electric car which is a better car. But that question of turning politics into a status game where you seek to demean, for example, calling people racist for things which are not remotely evidence of racism on the part of the person using the language, for instance. Particularly some of that status game, I think, is evidenced by people taking up arms on behalf of minority groups rather than actually letting the minority groups speak for themselves. I find something creepy about that.
Well, that's
I want to hear from trans people. I don't want to hear from a bunch of political activists affecting to speak on behalf of the trans community. I want trans voices on the TV talking about their own personal experience. Okay. And so when you have those people who essentially take up a kind of white savior approach, that's a status game. That's a luxury belief going on there. Now, it happens on the other side as well. I'm not suggesting this isn't in any way one-sided. What I'm saying is that there is no real form of persuasion that's effective that is preceded by the humiliation of the person you're trying to persuade.
Wait, say that again. So there's
I don't know of any effective form of persuasion other than the worst kind of Stalinist show trial. Okay, where you effectively torture someone into confessing. But I don't know of an effective, enduring form of persuasion which starts off by humiliating the person you're seeking to persuade.
Yes.
Okay, so what you can learn from the advertising industry, I'm often find myself criticizing these things, not because I necessarily disagree with the intention behind them, but because I think they're just adopting very poor tactics if you wish to succeed. Now, okay, there are behaviors you can stigmatize. Okay, you can stigmatize drink driving, and that works. But actually, effectively stigmatizing what you might call the foundation myths or the core identity of the person themselves. Okay, that's not going to succeed. If something is deeply entwined with someone's identity, okay, then effectively you will impress your own peer group, your own in-group, if you successfully humiliate the opposition.
Turn that off, is that all right?
Yeah. I'm
sorry.
going to do that in a second.
Yeah.
And what someone called this is the football-ification of politics. If you look at football fans, they love yelling, really, potent abuse at the opposing fans. Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't, you never get anybody who's, what's the great Millwall phrase? No one likes us, we don't care. Okay. That behavior makes you feel great if you're a Chelsea fan abusing, the fans of poorer northern sides by waving money in the air. Okay. Yeah. I'm sure it's great fun. Okay. It may make you feel great and make you look good in terms of your standing within your own particular crowd. But there's not a single recorded instance of someone going, you're right. I'm going to abandon my support for Middlesbrough or Newcastle United, and I'm going to become a Chelsea fan because of that activity. It doesn't work that way. Now, what we've got to remember is that because football loyalties are entirely kind of baked in, it isn't really an attempt to persuade, it's an attempt to humiliate. Okay? And it's entirely tribal. But it's not a healthy thing. It doesn't, it's not really a vehicle for voluntary social change through collective consensus.
I have just discovered a secret weapon. Please, please, please don't tell anyone. This secret weapon helps you get listed, stay listed, and most importantly, grow. This secret weapon is being used by absolutely banging brands like Bold Bean Co., Perfect Head, Neat, Trip, and Cheeky Panda. No wonder they're absolutely smashing it. But look, are you ready to get your mitts on this secret weapon and absolutely smash it too? I am thrilled, so thrilled to announce our brand new podcast partner, Northstar. What is Northstar, I hear you thinking? Northstar is a monthly subscription to an online platform giving you access to category data, category insights, anytime, any place, anywhere. It's basically the Netflix for challenger brands. It levels the playing field. Why do you need category data? Well, the first thing is making your pitch speak the buyers and retailers language is so important. It's going to help you unlock more listings, unlock deeper distribution with existing clients, back the right MPD, and actually understand how your competition is performing. But the even better news, are you ready to rock and roll at your next range review? You no longer need to hire a full-time category manager. Instead, just parachute in Northstar when your next Waitrose, Sainsbury's or Tesco range reviews coming up. They're your outsourced in-house partner. Save money. Their team will come in. They'll help you prep, plan and smash your next range review. I'm so excited to be partnering with Northstar. Check them out in the episode description below. Delighted to announce the extension of our partnership with the wonderful Billy and Paul from Mackenzie Jones, but even more exciting, they have just launched a brand new brand as part of Mackenzie Jones called MKJ Ignite. MKJ Ignite is a recruitment firm which specializes full shebang, focus entirely on challenge brand space. They work with some incredible brands, Lucky Saint, Good Rays, Purdy and Fig, Hunt and Gather, and Real Superfoods. They can support with your hiring needs across all levels, top to bottom, junior entry-level jobs, all the way through up to MD and CEO level. So if you're looking for a field sales stomper, a sales wizard, an ops guru, a supply chain sensei, you name it, MKJ Ignite can help you out. And look, if you're looking to wet your whistle, ignite your curiosity, then check out the poddy we recorded with them back in July. Laden with wisdom, all about like do's and don'ts of hiring and like how to create the perfect job description. You will love it.
Yeah, it's are you right to just?
I'll go and do that.
Yeah, so it bubbles up. It's I think the point about the kind of the extremism point we were talking about earlier about people jumping on the bandwagon, but I think these vegan meat brands, why they've done very well is, or some have done well, is they did two things. They played on the luxury beliefs thing, in that obviously veganism being better for the planet, etc., was like on the rise, one. But then they also, and you probably know this, well, you will know this better than me, but there was, I think, because they stole not even the semiotics, they stole like, this literally looks like a burger. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That those two things worked really well. And I think that's why we had such a big explosion of vegan meat. There was a time about 2 years ago when it was like everywhere, and everyone was like stuffing their face with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting things in the world, by which I mean, can you tell the difference? I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, which is, can you tell the difference between something that's a flash in the pan and something which is an enduring form of social change? Now, if you look at post-COVID effects, I would say that, actually, I think it's much more interesting if you disaggregate the data, because we saw this huge surge in restaurant going, sociability, pub going, holiday making, all those other things.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a proportion of the population who remain agoraphobic after lockdown.
Agoraphobic.
Fear of going out. Generally they're much more conscious, aversion to crowds, aversion to, social events. I think there's a subset of the population which has got stuck in the old behavior. Equally, I think there are other behaviors that emerge from COVID, like flexible work. And the idea that, well, I've got 3 Zoom calls and I've got 100 emails to do and I've got to write a presentation. Why would I need to go into an office to do that? That behavior, I think, that new, effectively we have a new comparative frame where before going into the office was the default and you needed a really good reason not to do so, okay? Although that was actually never quite true on Fridays among senior people, by the way.
Yeah.
A lot of whom, before COVID, used to work from home on a Friday, quite commonly. But what you now have is it's no longer a default that you go into the office. You look at your diary and go, is it a good idea to go into the office tomorrow? Would I be more productive at home? And I don't see that reverting to the status quo ante at all. I think that's stuck. The genie's out of the bottle. The horse has bolted. I think attempts to say you must be back in the office 5 days a week. A Goldman Sachs can do it because they probably pay people enough for people to do.
Exactly.
You're already being ritually humiliated in exchange for money. So this is just yet one further humiliation.
Yeah.
Okay. So they can probably pay people enough to do that. I don't think most employers who actually need to hold on to staff and for whom staff loyalty and commitment is important, I don't think most employers can afford to do that anymore. But what happens with trends like the vegan food trend is you get things which are flash in the pan, 9-day wonders. You get products like that when you buy them, you think they're amazing, but actually my use of my Oculus Rift or whatever it is was fairly intense for the first few days and fairly negligible ever since. 3D TV always seems to be one of these things which is, it's got a great future and it always will have, and every few years there's this great surge in interest in 3D TV and then it ends just as quickly as it began.
What's happening there? If we talk about, right at the beginning, we're talking about sort of bees and collectivism and because I saw it come out of kind of nowhere. You had all these vegan meat brands bubble up. Mm-hmm. You had, and do you know the kind of the story of a lot of them? Basically, I think other than one, most of them are in decline now. They've gone into retail, hasn't really worked. You have some restaurants that have them.
In some ways,
in America it was huge, but kind of
the thing that probably will endure is that most restaurant menus will continue to contain a vegetarian option and a vegan option, which in many cases, of course, doubles the meat-free option for the customer. And as a consequence of that, by the way, I'm not vegetarian or vegan, but 1 time out of 3, just by the law of averages, I end up eating a vegetarian or vegan meal. And by the way, that's a perfectly acceptable way to reduce meat consumption, which is instead of a few people abandoning meat altogether, you have a lot of people. And actually,
that's you walking down the middle, though. That's what you say. People want you to.
People want you to make a stand one way or the other.
Yeah.
And actually, just as actually a perfectly acceptable response to the reduction of carbon emissions is wherever possible, use less carbon rather than we must have a net zero target by 20 so-and-so. An awful lot of change happens through what evolutionary biologists would call the adjacent possible. It's what you can do right now. In other words, it's not the theoretical ideal. An awful lot of kind of political movements start with something like communism, which is this is how society will work. This is how it will work better. And we're going to proceed on that basis. In other words, now, most progress is really evolutionary. You do what you can at any given time. And provided the direction of travel is in the right direction, what's the problem? Now, a huge amount of the reduction in meat consumption in the UK I owe this to a very good guy who's on Welsh Walty on Twitter, who did a lot of work with farmers. And the farmers would always say, well, of course, meat sales are down because all these bloody vegetarians, you see. And he did the research and said that actually the decline in meat consumption occasioned by people becoming vegetarian is relatively small. What's making the difference is a trend for food that contains very little meat. So if you think about it, if you go back 30, 40 years, your main meal would often be a big slab of meat with some vegetables alongside it.
Yeah.
And the main meal now might be a pizza which has some pepperoni and a few little slithers of ham on top, but it's for the most part a vegetarian meal with some meat trimming. Okay, the meat is no longer the centerpiece of the meal; it's a kind of ornament to the meal. Okay,
yes.
now
Yes.
So a pepperoni pizza, when you think about it, if you actually take all the pepperoni off and you stack them, it's actually not much of a sausage.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean it looks a lot because it's covering the whole surface, but it's been very thinly sliced. And so the greater part of the reduction in meat consumption came through non-vegetarians eating meat differently and less, rather than a smaller group of people who are eschewing meat altogether.
So so it's almost like if you have this theoretical North Star. So I say you could say communism, and then it's the adjacent possible.
Yeah.
Vegan meat is right. We're going to supplant McDonald's burger. We're going to supplant the McDonald's burger. That's their kind of communist North Star.
That's in other words, it's a new reality.
Yeah.
We're going to impose a new reality,
and then the adjacent,
regardless of where you. Adam Smith says something about this, the idea that you can move people around as if they're pieces on a chessboard. The man of system, he talks about. And the point is there's so many interacting forces between the different people on the chessboard that you can't simply move from one equilibrium state to another equilibrium state without passing through quite a lot of intermediary stages, if at all, by the way. And then, so the idea is there's a graffiti, which I think it's Caitlin Moran quotes. And it's actually, even though it's actually a graffiti, or technically a graffito, I suppose. It's the singular of graffiti.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it's written on the wall of a toilet in Brighton, of all places. But strangely, in a way, it's a very conservative statement. And it simply says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And that's a very good encapsulation of what you might call the intermediate possible. Now I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of the intermediate possible versus the theoretical perfect. Okay.
Just define those quickly. So
the intermediate possible, if you want to reduce meat consumption, is the pepperoni pizza. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the intermediate possible.
Right.
Full-on universal veganism tomorrow is what you might call the centrally planned sort of communistic approach.
Yeah.
In other words, one of them is bottom up. And it starts where people are with what they have and what they can do. And the other one is top down, and it imposes a new reality on people regardless of their situation, context, circumstances. So evolutionary biology understands this thing called the intermediate possible, which is where can you go next?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's more interested in some ways, as good innovation is for the most part, in the intermediate possible than it is in creating some theoretical dream world that exists only on paper. And I've got an example of that, actually. I know this is supposed to be a food podcast, and I'm now talking about home heating. But my brother's an astrophysicist, and he knows all the shit about heat pumps. In other words, if you have a heat pump, it's effectively 5 times as efficient at warming your home as a boiler is. And the reason is the boiler is creating heat, it's generating heat, it's making something that's cold hot, whereas the heat pump is moving warmth from the outside to the inside. And actually, countries with a climate like the UK are ideally suited to heat pumps because it's never that cold. Most of the time, okay? Very rarely is it extremely cold outside.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And so generally, you're bridging quite a small distance in degrees Kelvin, not centigrade or Fahrenheit, but in degrees Kelvin versus absolute zero, you're bridging quite a small divide between the temperature outside and the temperature inside, and therefore heat pumps can be 5 times more efficient. In other words, moving heat indoors is 5 times less energy intensive than using gas to generate the same amount of heat. And that's why heat pumps are environmentally efficient. Now, The government currently says that, yes, we'll give you a grant for installing a heat pump, but you have to rip out your existing boiler, replace your radiators, bury a vast great pipe in your garden under your lawn, which is where the warmth is derived from outside, okay? And it will involve you an expenditure of, I would say, realistically £15,000 with quite a lot of disruption. My brother doesn't do that. He just buys air conditioning units. Now, he's still got an oil boiler or gas boiler, I can't remember which it is, okay? But he just installs every now and then, one at a time, a couple of £1,000 a time, you install an air conditioning unit. Now, an air conditioning unit is a heat pump, okay? It's simply, when you use it in reverse, it's a very effective air-to-air heat pump. And when you reverse it, when it's too hot indoors, okay, it does the opposite, which is it air conditions, which it refrigerates, it removes temperature from your home and dumps it outside.
Well, so air conditioning can be a heat pump?
Yeah. It's the same thing.
Really?
Okay, all you need is a single basic toggle switch.
And where do you get that
so
toggle
my father,
switch?
Before the last heat wave, my father's 93, and my brother and I bought him an air conditioning unit for the main room where he is, in his flat.
Yep.
And when it's very, very hot, he uses it to cool the room down, because when you're 93, you really don't want a heat wave, okay? And then the rest of the year, he uses it as a heat pump. And when I go into his room, if anything, actually, the room's too bloody hot for me. So it's obviously doing a pretty good job. And it's enjoying this kind of five-fold efficiency. Now,
But how come loads of people don't input?
but nobody knows this.
Oh, right. So, yeah, okay.
But why don't you get a subsidy? And the reason is that they didn't want to subsidize air-to-air heat pump stroke air conditioning units, because they thought that, well, if people then start using air conditioning, it will increase their energy consumption. To which I'd say, mate, okay, this is the fucking UK, right? Okay, fair enough. If you're the Italian government, the Greek government, right? If you're the government of bloody Somalia or whatever,
Yeah.
Fair point. You don't want people air conditioning their homes that much because it will increase energy consumption. Although you might argue in Britain that at the times when there is quite high need for cooling, solar power is probably going gangbusters, okay? So maybe we don't need to worry quite as much as we thought, because the solar power will take up the slack. But in any case, it's like 3 weeks of the year. The other 49 weeks, it's either switched off, or in the winter, it's producing warmth extremely efficiently. You can keep your existing boiler and use it in extremis, which is if your air conditioning units aren't doing the job. And you could easily get it by simply saying, in order to get this government subsidy, you have to sign up for a thing which makes your gas disproportionately more expensive. So that when you do use gas, because the heat pump can't quite hack it because it's -7 outside because there's a freak cold snap, okay, you can use gas to top up the effect of your heat pump, but you've got to pay. That would solve the problem. It's not a one-off payment of £15,000, £20,000. It's a bit-by-bit enhancement to your home, which will also doesn't require you to make the terrifying step of actually tearing out your existing heating system. Okay? Now, what I'm saying there is that the intermediate possible is a much better solution to the problem than the theoretical perfect.
Yeah.
And most change, I would argue, and all of evolutionary change has happened that way. It's by exploring the intermediate possible. There's no capacity in evolution for you to jump intermediate steps. Well, okay, I better not say that because I'll have a few evolutionary. But broadly speaking, it happens through building and effectively, to use that graffiti in the Brighton toilet, it's start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
So with linking this back to the vegan meat thing, is
Yes.
like that's the theoretical
There was a
perfect,
statistic I heard,
and then
which is that if Americans reduced their per capita meat consumption to the level of the UK, it would make more difference than if the entire UK went vegetarian.
yeah, that's wild.
And there's a brilliant planner at Ogilvy called Matt Waxman, who's written about this on LinkedIn for, I think, Creative Review magazine, where he says that quite a lot of vaping rather than getting people to quit smoking. Okay, that would be an example of the intermediate possible. Another example of the intermediate possible would be you get people to wear condoms rather than getting people to practice abstinence. In other words,
the 10K steps a day was that. You know,
Yeah, that was exactly an example of that. Yeah. In other words,
5K, couch to 5K was a great example.
brilliant example.
Yeah,
And actually, what used to happen, and we did quite a lot, I hope, to prevent this happening because it was silly, was you'd be going to people who, like me, are markedly unfit, and you'd show them images of Olympic athletes, okay, as like the perfect ideal of fitness. Now, to them, that is such. Well, first of all, anybody over 30, you're not going to make that level of fitness anyway, okay?
Yeah.
An awful lot of, particularly women, but also men, just not interested in the fitness thing. It doesn't make them feel any better. If they go jogging, they don't feel good. They just feel worse. There are an awful lot of people who don't like it. But as you rightly say, getting people off zero
There was
is an intermediate
in Costa Rica. That was one of the best things I've ever seen.
Sorry, did I say intermediate?
Intermediate possible.
Yeah. The better phrase from evolutionary biology is the adjacent possible.
Adjacent possible, but the two are kind of linked. I get it.
Linked, yeah.
But there was a place in Costa Rica, which is, as you say, if someone's we need everyone is obsessed with these extreme things, but actually most people want something along the middle, which is that middle ground. There was a gym in Costa Rica, and the name of it was like a kind of a workout class.
Yes.
And obviously, like, you're on the beach, and it was called Happy Hour. And I thought that was such a good name for obviously it was a play on the cocktails, obviously Happy Hour, and obviously you go there for an hour. And they said, and like this, the tagline was something like fairly hard workouts because you're on holiday, which is basically basically like you're coming here for a happy hour. You're going to do a bit of work out. Happy hour, play on the word.
Fairly hard.
Yeah, fairly hard,
and
it is that middle ground. I think the names escape me, but I think
that's a great piece of marketing, which acknowledges the context in which the person finds.
Because most people don't want these extreme things. And back to the first point.
Well, my suggestion, which I never got Public Health England to adopt, was if it is true that genuinely having 10 or 15 minutes of aerobic exercise 3 or 4 times a week, okay, was beneficial to their health. Why don't you just encourage people to have more sex?
Yeah.
Okay, because nature has already found a fairly strong existing inducement for people to engage in, reasonably vigorous, exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, which has its own inbuilt evolutionary reward. Why don't you capitalize on that rather than saying you've just got home, you've turned on the telly, but no, you've got to go and get changed and put on ridiculous clothes.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're getting undressed anyway. And I've often looked at interesting questions like that, which are, actually, how do you build on an existing behavior or trend and simply accelerate it, rather than attempting to reverse a trend or to fight a trend head on?
Yes.
And in a way, people's natural inclination is, as I said, is adversarial. It's I am right and you are wrong. And actually, I noticed this, that when I moved out of London, I still have it a bit, because I moved out of London. So I lived in Bayswater.
For how long?
From 1988 to 2001.
Right.
And I really liked it, but then we had twins. So we thought, okay, had we had one child at a time, I think we would have stuck it out in London for child number 1. We were in a 2-bedroom apartment. You could have had one kid. Having a double buggy on Oxford Street isn't much of a laugh. I upsticked and moved to a place called Westerham, which is kind of just outside the M25 in Kent.
Yeah.
And it's rather like those people who leave London, who decide they don't like London, and they move to the Outer Hebrides. And I go, look, mate, you're overcompensating. I'm perfectly happy to accept that when you're above a certain age, London both loses some of its magic, because I'm not going to some weird nightclub and stay out till 3 a.m. and going woo. Okay, I'm too old for that shit, and it's just not what I want to do. And anyway, young people's music is crap. Okay, but on the other hand, okay,
a lot of indignation.
On the other hand, don't make the mistake of moving to the Outer Hebrides or to mid Wales, because what you're doing there is you're overcompensating. You've decided that London's impossible, so you're then immediately going to the opposite point of view. Actually. No, this is, again, interesting. Suburbia can actually be pretty nice. You get a patch of garden, you can park your car.
Suburbia's not cool, though. That's back to the status game.
Well, there's one exception to that, which always interests me. A lot of Brits, cool Brits, okay, there are 2 things you can do. If you want to get out of London, because I don't think... we can bring this into the restaurant conversation if you like. I don't think that the advantage that London confers on consumers relative to the rest of the country, like smaller provincial towns, okay, is nearly as stark and nearly as impressive as it was in 1988. In 1988, when I left London and kind of went back to stay in the country where my parents were at the time, after about a week, I was climbing up the walls, and when I finally got back on the Westway and saw the signs going, the West End, the city, and I was driving along the Westway because there were no speed cameras then. You'd hit 80 on the Westway, and I'd pull off for the sort of turning for Westbourne Grove, and I felt myself come alive. Okay, now part of this is me getting older, but part of it is things like the internet. Okay, the internet, large parts of consumerism now are effectively geographically irrelevant, okay? If you want to buy weird hi-fi equipment, when I was a kid, you had to go to, you'd sometimes go to London. You'd certainly go to Bristol or Cardiff to buy the kit, okay? Now you just go online. If you want to buy a weird book, if you want to watch a Korean film, all of that stuff. If you want weird food ingredients, Ocado, okay? That's the best shop in Britain, right? Okay? Yeah. If you want to buy really interesting, if you're interested in high quality food of any kind, in variety, there isn't a shop in London that competes with that competes with Ocado. You've got Gusto. You've got one of the things I really like is Michelin star restaurants. For example, there's a great website, ubchef.com, which is a restaurant, Michelin starred in the Isle of Wight, where they'll cook and ship the food to you.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually, funnily enough, I order a meal and I spread it over 3 days. In other words, rather than having one fantastic meal, you have 3 meals with a fantastic component. It's better value for money. You have businesses like My Supper Hero, okay, which will send you utterly fantastic food. So all I'm saying is that, okay, London offers fantastic employment opportunities currently, although flexible working might slightly blur that line a little bit. But in terms of the quality of consumption, particularly when you consider the hassle you've got to go through to live there, okay, you've got lots of friends, yeah, but it takes 3 weeks to arrange to meet them. All of those disadvantages. All I'm saying is that the advantage of living in London over living in Monmouth, where I grew up, which was stark and absolutely self-evident in 1988, isn't altogether clear to me now.
So the couple of things on that is
now, you're younger than me.
About restaurants.
So in fairness, London has more upside. Are you single or are you...
Single, yeah.
You're single. Okay. If you're single, I imagine that Tinder in Cornwall gets a bit repetitive, right? Okay. There are huge advantages if you're single, obviously, to living in London. There are huge opportunities early in life in terms of simple opportunities which present themselves and what you might call, being there, showing up, being present. But those diminish, I think, with age, and also, in many ways, the extent to which, for a person aged 45 or 50 who already has kids, the benefits that London confers are not really that clear-cut to me.
Oh my God, I am so excited. It feels like Hungary is finally swimming in the big leagues. I can't believe this. It's absolutely mental. But delighted to announce that Big Fish, yes, Big Fish, are partnering the podcast. Perry's been on the podcast 3 times. Listeners absolutely love it. Some of our most downloaded and cherished episodes of all time. But Big Fish are behind literally so many brands in your cupboard, in your weekly shop. Charlie Bigham, Year Valley, Tyrrell's, Clipper Tea, Goo, Rana. Mate, the list is longer than the River Nile. But they also share risk and invest in brands that they really believe are a force for good. They're brands that they believe are going to be the next big thing, like Howder, the snack that gives back. But even more exciting news, Big Fish want to speak to the next wave of small challenger food and drink brands that are destined for big things, the raconteurs, the movers, shakers, buccaneering visionaries. So look, if you want to speak to Big Fish and just have a chat, get your brand in front of them, then drop me a message. My mate Louis from Local Beer, amazing beer, was in their office, aka La Fish Bowl, last week, chatting to Perry, Freddie and the Big Fish crew. So drop me a message if you would like to speak to them. Bohemi, our beloved sponsor, are helping build the fastest growing challenger food and drink brands. Look, if you're a small brand just starting out and need your first indie stockist, your first 100 stockists to wholesale, Bohemi are the platform to categorically speed that up. But if you're a big brand wanting to get bigger, Bohemi are also insane. They make field sales marble smooth, silky slick. They're just epic. Ollie's been on this podcast twice actually. They saw a 29% uplift in sales when using Bohemi to check major malt listings availability. Insane. 29% uplift by downloading an app. Insane. Lucky Saint, my boy Aaron Duff, who's coming on this podcast in a couple of weeks, he uses it to manage a team of 30 people, and Lucky Saint have unlocked 500 draft listings by using Bohemi. Look, you've got to get involved with this stuff. It's absolutely insane, and it will categorically change your life. It's just the sickest platform. I use it all the time at Islands.
I will get on to my where I sit on that kind of spectrum, but in terms of the restaurants and kind of leveling the playing field is you've and this middle ground piece, right? So you'll have somewhere hipsters raise the floor, chains. Hipsters raise the ceiling, chains raise the floor. Yeah, I love that. So, and what you have?
So this is my defence of everything from Travelodge to Premier Inn to Starbucks to Costa, etc. It's very fashionable to deride them, but what they do is they say, if you can open a hotel, you can compete with us. That's fine. But you've got to be at least that good.
Yeah.
Now, if anybody who remembers British hotels from the 1970s or early 80s, okay, it was possible to survive as a hotel simply on what you might call distressed purchases while being absolutely shit. I mean, literally appallingly crap. Broadly speaking, if you want to survive as a coffee shop now, you've got to be at least pretty good.
Yeah.
And so that business of eradicating the worst, that's the role that chains play, which is actually very valuable.
Yeah, so that's raising
the floor. And what hipsters do...
Raise the ceiling.
Now, what happens is the hipsters generally gravitate in areas where there are low property prices or cheaper rates because you can afford to experiment.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm not sure, if you gave me a week and said, do you want to do a culinary tour of London? Or do you want to spend the week doing a culinary tour of East Kent? You know, I'm including Margate, Ramsgate, Sandwich.
Well, that's what I was just literally. I was literally about to say. The middle of the ground is Margate.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'll give them a shout out. Up Down a House just outside Deal, extraordinary place, which you wouldn't find in London.
Yeah.
And there's parking, and it's a tragic thing. Okay, but we can crap on as much as we like. But the best restaurant is the one with a fucking car park.
Yeah.
Okay, because you turn up, you pull in, and you walk into the restaurant. You don't have, there's affordable property there for people to experiment. I'd rather spend, I think, a week on a culinary tour of, Thanet and East Kent. And by the way, I'd cover the whole waterfront. I'd go to Nell's Cafe just off the A2, which is a fantastic transport cafe. It's just, and actually, I think the variety, experimentation and interest, but that's the great creative, there are two great creative tricks if you want to move to suburbia and stay cool, okay? You move to the seaside, that's okay. I don't know why that is, but you go to Brighton, you go to Hastings, Whitstable, Folkestone, Margate, okay, that's cool, okay? If you move to the Cotswolds, not cool, really, okay? Cotswolds are many things, not cool, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing you can do is move to Los Angeles, where, of course, everybody lives in suburbia. And one of my theories is that creative Brits love LA because they can actually live in a suburban house. But all their friends in back home in the UK go, it's my cool friend in Los Angeles.
Yes.
You don't have a cool friend in Cirencester to the same extent.
Yeah, you've got the status. You don't lose the status.
So, and probably that's true of Chicago to an extent. You can live this because American suburbia is brilliant, okay? It's British suburbia is pretty good. Belgian suburbia is very good. And one of the things
how's Belgian suburbia good versus the UK?
There are certain countries that just do suburbs really quite well.
But how would you say they're different? How would you say they're different or / better than the UK?
American suburbia. Do I really envy really rich people who live in New York? No, not really. But I had some friends who lived in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, and it literally is beautiful white weatherboard house. Picket fence around the outside, nice lawn, and, lots of parking. And you do go, actually, this is a pretty nice quality of life. Really, really good, classy American suburbia is a pretty high quality of life.
In terms back to the, I think why the playing field's being leveled out is because the hipsters raising the ceiling, they are not geographically bound now to London. And actually, it's
also the rates in London have become punitive.
Yeah, but it's they still get high status by saying, I've travelled to this new and discovered X.
Yes.
So Sagrosso in Margate, you've got the fish restaurant there, which is called... The name has fucking escaped me. But
East Kent, by the way, is absurdly underdiscovered because everybody in London, when they leave London, they head to the nearest single-digit A road and they keep going. So West Londoners always went out on the A4. Well, okay, that's a two-digit A road. They go out on the A40, they go out on the M4, they go out on the A3, and they go southwest or west. North Londoners go north. And what was so interesting about the Kent coast is shits on the Cotswolds, in my opinion. I mean, I have a particular aversion. My mother's family lived in the Cotswolds effectively from about, I think literally, it's like the late 11th century or the early 12th century, pretty much until, well, there's some of them still there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd also resent going down to a place where your family have lived for, 900 years, but you're considered as a twat down from London. Now, in East Kent, I am a twat down from London, so I don't mind who treats me like that.
Yes.
But I would, those, you're absolutely right to mention those restaurants in Margate, which one, by the way, I haven't been to yet. But the level of experimentation and interest, and you can get a table, and you're not ripped off, okay? And the clientele are vastly more agreeable, in my opinion. Your fellow diners are much more likable.
But it all starts with the hipster.
It starts with the hipster.
The hipsters. So, for example,
they're the shock troops of gentrification.
Yeah. So what they're doing, and now because of social media, is the hipster goes there, talks about it. Suddenly, there's a scarcity thing, or not necessarily a scarcity thing, but the restaurant in I can't remember the names. It's on the tip of my tongue. But it's only 12 seats. So suddenly you have scarcity, right? Yeah. Because people are like, oh my God, I need to, this fucking influencer's been down there. Jay Rayner's been there, for example.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so Suffolk, that's a big starting place. My friend George Pell used to be the general manager at Les Cargo. I don't know why I said it like that. Les Cargo in Soho. The French institution. Yeah, Marco was there. He then, and he calls it the frontier. So during COVID, they were like, we need to make some money. So he went up to Suffolk, right?
Yes.
Suffolk is notoriously, his analogous way of saying it is, we've got the best paint in the world and paint brushes, i.e. produce. We just don't have any canvases, i.e. restaurants. Beautiful. So they've got the beautiful, he's a great orator. And anyway, so long story longer, he set up this hotel. He's left his job. He's moved up to Suffolk, was living in Brixton, had gone up to Suffolk, and he then gets a review, and I talked about this when I had the podcast with him, from Jay Rayner, right? So Jay Rayner's not a hipster, right? But he's definitely the neophyte.
I know him a bit. He makes a very brilliant distinction, which is, he says, I'm not a food critic, I'm a restaurant critic.
Yes.
In other words, his critique is of the whole place, the whole experience.
Yes.
And the whole question of why people go to restaurants, where in some cases, of course, the food is surprisingly incidental.
Yes. Well, yes. So what George has done is, so you get, but other influencers have gone up there. So once you get Jay Rayner goes there, you then have the hipsters and the influencers and the early adopters going up there saying, "Oh, this place is amazing." More press comes, and then suddenly, and what they're doing in Suffolk is, George only has maybe, I don't know, 20 seats. So suddenly there's a scarcity thing. So you're fully booked. So it creates this kind of constant stream of demand. And then more hipsters see or influencers see. So they're like, oh, look, I've managed to get a table at the Suffolk, which is the name of the restaurant. And then they have high status because they're saying, I've been in this restaurant. And then this is happening all around all these satellite cities. Manchester is like now
absolutely
becoming like I'm actually interviewing, I don't know if you've ever met him.
I'm a Georgist, and it's a strange...
When you say Georgist, I've heard you say that a lot. What does that mean?
It's a strange economic belief, which means that the principal sort of form of taxation should be on the value of unimproved land.
Fucking hell. How did you get to that?
The point being that the insight of Henry George is that when you have an activity that depends for its performance on its location, okay, most of the economic gains don't end up going to the person who performs the work. They go to the person who owns the land. Okay, so an extreme case would be when you buy a pair of... Why is Heathrow Terminal 5 full of luxury goods? Okay, well, it's partly they're there for advertising purposes, not to sell. But the main beneficiary of those extraordinarily high margins actually is the owner of the real estate, the airport, not the person in the shop or the owner of the brand.
Yeah.
And so you can escape that thanks to the car, by the way, not just the internet, by going and buying undervalued land and making it a destination. Now,
Mr. Village.
Henry George would say you should actually tax what is extractive income. In other words, income extracted by owning the land. You remember when people said after COVID, you must come into London to bail out Pret and Costa Coffee. And my argument was, you're not actually bailing out Pret and Costa Coffee, you're bailing out the Duke of Westminster, who owns the land on which those shops reside. Okay, and you now have a situation in London where the combination of rates and rent effectively mean that you're not really paying for the food anymore, you're paying for the location. And so the clever thing to do, what you might call, the solution is to avoid the depredation. So someone from a very, very good Indian restaurant opened a place called the Ambret. There's now one in Canterbury, one in Rye, but they first opened in Margate. And what they did is they couldn't afford to open in London. They had the culinary talent, but they didn't have the capital. And probably, do you necessarily want to run an Indian restaurant where it costs £70 and half your money goes straight out of the door to the landlord? Okay. And so they took over what was effectively a derelict pub in Margate with parking, created a great Indian restaurant. It's a great destination. People drive there. They don't charge as much as in London, but they get to keep more of the money.
That's what you said, the word destination. Destination.
It's the language of the Michelin Guide, which is vol le voyage, you see.
Yes.
You have these various things, I think it's, 1 star, 2 star. There's vol le détour, which is worth going out of your way for. Yeah. And there's, I think it's vol le visite, which is, if you're there, this is worth going to. There's vol le détour, which is worth going out of your way for. And then there's vol le voyage, which is a destination in its own right.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you can become vol le voyage, I don't mean you have to have 3 Michelin stars, but a place where people are actually happy to go, let's get in the car and go there. You can make a lot of money because, as I said, what you're paying in rent and rates is the same as the shitty pub, 5 miles down the road, but you've now got people flooding to you.
Yeah.
And so this is my argument that actually London is pricing itself out of being interesting. And I think we saw that before with West London versus East London, okay? West London became so expensive. I have a very interesting axis, which I call the skanky wanky axis.
Right.
Which is, if an area is exclusively poor, it becomes a bit too skanky. But if an area becomes too rich, it becomes wanky.
Yeah.
And where you want to be is a place where there's a mixture of, there's genuine gradations of wealth. Okay?
Islington is the example of that.
You might argue, yeah.
Skanky and wanky.
Skanky and wanky.
The amalgamation of skanky and wanky.
Skanky and wanky. And so I think there's something interesting there, which is that actually, I'm now, I look forward to a trip out of London on culinary grounds, that I'm going to discover more interesting stuff and actually more easily. Obviously, there's hugely interesting stuff in London if you want to be massively ripped off. Okay. But I actually feel my heart race more, with a trip down to Margate in terms of what I'll get.
Oh, there's an adventure.
Curve coffee roasters.
Yeah, adventure.
There's Broadstairs has a few utterly fantastic restaurants. Deal, utterly sensational.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing I've always wanted to ask you, Rory, is, and this again, kind of going down a different kind of pathway here, is what, and
the other interesting thing is that if you do well in Kent, you earn repeat custom. I would argue that Londoners are now so sated with choice, they're always wanting to try something new. Okay?
Well, and also you won't get
the really valuable feedback for a restaurant is, do people come back? That's the only thing that really matters in terms of a measure. It's why actually, and I always ask this weird question, which is if you ask people, what's the most amazing meal you've had in your life? And they answer, and they typically name some restaurant in Copenhagen or Madrid or whatever. And then you ask the question, how often have you eaten there? The answer is always once.
Yeah.
Well, that's, in a weird way, that's not a great restaurant, is it? I mean, measured by my form of, it's rather like those technologies, Apple Vision Pro, which may well be a really expensive technology, which everybody tries and goes, that's amazing. But then mysteriously it ends up in the back cupboard, after 3 months.
100%. Yes. So the question I wanted to ask you is, in food specifically, I think you can do it a lot with food. The biggest example is, it's almost like what is happening in the human brain? Like, why do humans love kind of alliteration and onomatopoeia with when buying things? Like, what's actually happening? So I think it's the fucking best, and it genuinely, it does something palpable to it kind of gets me drooling like a famished Rottweiler when I drive past the McDonald's. It's the McMuffin sign, and it says 7:45 and it's loads of M's, and it's like, that to me is like that. It's like the of the morning, like waking up, the of the like.
You have to admit, by the way, in marketing terms, that McDonald's have played a blinder, really.
Yeah, I think they're the best. They're the best.
Yeah.
But what? Yeah, but on, like, I don't know if you know but what is happening? Like, why is it when humans, and it happens a lot in food and just in marketing. The other example, KFC. I had one of the second guys I've had on the podcast is he's like a language. He built this AI tool that's obsessed with language, and he had 3 different versions of language. He had what did he have? He had factual language, which is words that a bit on the wanky side, right? Is what companies love but humans hate. So it would be like corporate social responsibility or really hard words to digest. Sensory language is words like, in terms of food, it would be like, let's use KFC as an example. It would be like warm,
finger licking good.
Well, yeah. So that no, it'd be warm, delicious chicken would be picture. Sensory language, picture language, which is like the most persuasive form of language, he says, is something that creates a picture. So finger licking good, like, it's almost the hard consonant sounds is almost like the cantankerous crispy chicken, finger licking good, like that. Really, I don't know, but I'm trying to work out from you.
And it's authentically kind of Southern. It's got, in terms of 3 words that do the job, it's sensational
genius.
property.
Have you seen when KFC run out of chicken?
Yeah.
And they changed the name to
FCK.
Fuck. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, so what is happening with what's happening to humans when we see onomatopoeia or we see alliteration?
Well, I mean, the language around food is fascinating because, one of the things is that there are various things that will increase the price that people are willing to pay for food on a menu. One of them is provenance. If you put Pembrokeshire potatoes or Jersey this or whatever, anything that has a place of origin commands a premium. And weirdly, just, seemingly meaningless words like succulent carrots rather than just carrots. Also, there's a whole extraordinary science of menu design, which goes into detail like, you don't put the pound sign, you spell the price out in words rather than doing it in digits. You get rid of the second 2 digits, so you just have round pound pricing. People experiment enormously with this, which is what conveys promise. But you're right in that you can't separate. Okay, I'll get into a tiny bit into the neuroscience of this.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Which is that it looks as though most of what we perceive is a prediction, and that we use our senses to error correct where the prediction deviates from the reality. And that's a more efficient data architecture for the brain than effectively me looking at the picture in front of me and processing every pixel. If you're into digital photography, you'll be familiar with something called RAW mode. If you've got a fancy digital camera, you can shoot in RAW mode, where there's basically a few bits are used to describe each pixel in painstaking, intricate detail. Every single pixel is described. The reason you do that as a professional photographer is for editing, it's better. The way you achieve a JPEG or an MPEG is through a form of data compression where there is a likely value for each pixel based on the pixel that precedes it or adjoins it, okay? And you only use data to describe the extent to which the pixel value differs from the expected value. And that's a much more economical use of data, because if you've got a blue wall, you don't need the data going blue, 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 blue for every pixel, okay? You just go blue and then one single bit, same again, okay? Same again, same again, same again, same again, same again.
Yeah.
Okay, so that... I've probably done a complete disservice to the genius people who do effectively data compression in photography. That effectively is you have an expected value for everything, and you use data only to the extent that the reality differs from the expectation. The book you need to read on this is by a guy called Andy Clark. It's called The Experience Machine. He's an academic at the University of Sussex. He's a philosopher as well as being a kind of neuroscientist. And Andy Clark's book, The Experience Machine, effectively takes this model of human perception, which is the brain generates an expectation and then the senses then convey the contrast between the reality and the expectation. If it's right, it's not a new theory. Clark admits this. It was advanced first by people, I think, like William James and Hermann von Helmholtz in the 19th century. Hermann von Helmholtz and co. didn't have the advantages of JPEGs and MPEGs to understand data architecture. They didn't have really the advantage of information theory to understand why the brain would work that way. But we've got limited bandwidth in the optic nerve. It makes more sense for the optic nerve to concentrate on surprising information than to concentrate on all information. And if that's true, it explains essentially, I'd say the verdict of that is the science is in and the marketers were right all along, that things don't taste how they taste a strange combination of how they taste and how you expected them to taste. And there's a guy you must get on the show who's called Charles Spence at the University of Oxford, who's a kind of, how would you describe it? I suppose you call it psychophysics or else you might call it phenomenology. But it's all about the science of how, not the science of how we measure the world as scientists, i.e. degrees centigrade, but how we experience reality as human beings. So you'll know this if you've been to America. The weather forecast will say, tomorrow at Scottsdale it's going to be 97, but it feels like 92. And American weather forecasts often have a feels like temperature, which is not the actual objective temperature of the air. It factors in things like whether there's a breeze and the level of humidity, both of which affect how we as humans experience heat. High humidity, no breeze is a really painfully hot day. If you add a breeze and reduce the humidity and leave the temperature the same, I've wandered around places like Phoenix, Arizona, when it's 100 degrees, but because the humidity is really low, you basically wander around perfectly comfortable. The same temperature in Singapore, you're sweating like a sex offender, right? Okay, And so Spence's work, particularly around taste, he'll do things like wonderful experiments where you produce something that looks like a lemon, okay, looks exactly like a bitter citrus fruit, but you flavor it with strawberry essence. And the only scientific way to describe the human reaction to this is it fucks with people's heads. So in other words, you don't go, gosh, that looked like a lemon, but it's actually strawberry. That's how you'd expect if the Andy Clark theory isn't true. Instead, it almost creates a completely new taste, which is the taste of something that's strawberry-like when you expected it to be lemon. So the marketing of food...
Yeah.
The expectation you create when somebody goes in has a huge bearing on what they perceive, just as they always used to say about lager, people don't drink the beer, they drink the advertising.
And so the onomatopoeia, because let's use KFC as an example, finger licking good, right? So I was in Colombia, and before Costa Rica, I was in Colombia.
Oh, fantastic!
Which was really interesting. But I was in this place called Santa Marta, and I mean the food was fucking rank. The prawns overcooked.
There's no excuse for that, is there? Their raw materials are presumably fantastic.
Raw materials. I mean, one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been to.
Yeah,
I did get held at knife point twice, but that's a story for another day, which is crazy.
Well, my love of Colombia, bizarrely got effectively awakened by watching Narcos, because you couldn't help noticing that while they were committing mass murder, they were doing it against a really beautiful backdrop.
It was that. So I mean, I came out the airport and I had a couple of beers from Miami. Came out the airport, jumped in a cab, which was fucking foolish. Guys in the front seat driving.
This is Bogota, is it?
This is in Cartagena.
Cartagena?
So, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Another guy jumps in the front seat.
You're in trouble now.
Guy jumps in the seat next to me, and I was like, oh no, here we go. This is going to be a nightmare.
And did they have some bullshit story at first that I'm just giving my friends a lift? Because that happened to a German friend of mine in Rome.
In Rome, yeah.
Germans always get it worse because they carry so much cash. Yeah. Because Germans don't like credit cards.
Well, I mean, I may as well have a sign saying "mug me." I came out the airport with I was a little bit squiffy and had.
Of course, yeah.
I was on the flight getting on the beers.
So what happened? Knife came out, did it?
Well, no. So then basically, I had that backpack there, in my seat, and I was thinking, oh fucking hell, here we go. Because my friend was already there. we were driving along. They're like, "Welcome to Cartagena, man. Like, this country, welcome to my beautiful country." Blah, blah, giving me all the spiel, but I was like, "I'm fucked here. I know I'm fucked." Yeah. And he pulled out a bag of cocaine. I don't do cocaine. He was like, "Do you want some cocaine?" I was like, "No. I don't like. I just want to go to my hotel, mate. Can you take me to my hotel?" Throws this big bag of cocaine in my bag, and I was like, and he goes, "Yeah, you basically owe me 750 quid now." So I was like, what? I was like, what the fuck? Get back to the hotel, or get to the hotel, and I'm like, well, this is a bit like scary because this guy knows where I live now. The three of them know where I live. My mate comes down. And it's like, yeah, just because they had my case, which had all my podcast kit in. Of course. So I was thinking, if it was closed, I would have just said, fuck it, like, it's done.
Yeah.
But I had this kit was all in there. And they were... So anyway, my friend comes down and they're like, you owe us money for the... And so we just gave him the drugs bag. We're like, we don't want it. I literally threw it on the thing. And he was like, no, you owe me money. You owe me 750 quid. And then they started getting really aggressive. They're like, do you want the whole of Cartagena on your man? I was like, fuck this. I've just got here, right?
Yeah.
So then I was like, he was like, take me to the cash machine. And I was like, 300 meters away, let's walk. It's the middle of the day. He was like, no, you have to get in the car. So the big boy, my mate stayed with the big boy. I was like, you're staying with me, Dan, you go. So they took me down these shanty towns, which it was, I reckon it was a 25-minute drive, but it felt like 2 hours.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's the whole like time when you, but it was absolutely terrifying. They pulled me out, they put a knife to my thing here. Yeah. When I got to, the ATMs in foreign countries are not, they're like in a room, they're not like on the street. For some bizarre reason, my card, it was almost like my card wasn't working. That's what, I was saying earlier, I had to get a new card. For some fucking bizarre reason, it wasn't working. Then he started getting really aggressive. So I was like, oh, here we go. So then they took me to a Sainsbury's, well, not Sainsbury's in Colombia, but like their equivalent of a Sainsbury's local. I was like, hallelujah, like we're in the middle, we're in normality here. I'm not in the back of this like Toyota 4x4, favela thing. And obviously, they're all in it, and then this is just a heist they do every day. And they made Don Julio, the tequila.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets out this trolley, walks around, and I was just got the flight. I was sober as a fucking judge at this point. But I
imagine that sobers you up.
Yeah, it does. And I was just like, let's just get this over and done with. Like, I just want to go home or get to the apartment. And he pulls out 12 bottles. Yeah, 12 bottles
of Don Julio
tequila. Scans them all through. And then last minute, which I actually found quite hilarious, he just put some chewing gum on. It's like, you're going to mug me and you're going to ask for some chewing gum as well. And so I paid for that. And then he got in the car. And at that kind of point, I just knew it was a bit of a,
So by paying for the Don Julio, had you just...
it was about 750 quid.
Oh, right. It's serious shit.
It's ridiculous bottles, but it was... It was a wild experience, but yes. So that happened. But where I was originally starting was the food in Colombia. So the food in Santa Marta was repugnant. Like, and I was just, which was the food in Cartagena was amazing, but in Santa Marta, this other seaside town, which, as you said, was like, as your wife said, it's like watching Narcos, right? Got mugged there as well, but I won't tell you about that. But that's the same sort of thing. But I was like, I just need some sort of normality. I need, and I saw the finger licking good signs. I saw the KFC, the kind of the lurid lights. And I was like, oh my God, that's the promise. And as you were saying about your friend at the University of Sussex, because it's like we're waiting for that kind of what we expect. And we're almost like speeding it up to what we actually get. Well,
I can remember a similar experience getting stuck in quite heavy snow crossing the Rockies between Taos, New Mexico and Farmington, New Mexico. And all I can remember is we were terrified because there was no mobile signal. If you went off the road, this was a road where it's incomprehensible to Brits, but you're driving through northern New Mexico and you will go for 40 miles without seeing a car or a house or a building of any kind. Once after about 50 miles, you come across a truck stop, you go another 50 miles, not a single house, just wood, and the snow was falling and the temperature was dropping. And I was convinced we were going to, because it was getting increasingly snowy, we weren't in a 4x4, we're going to go off the road. I remember finally getting into Farmington and seeing a sign saying Burger King. Seriously, it was, my reaction was, it was like the promised land,
yes.
At last,
Yes.
And of course, we've got to understand, of course, with food, that there is the food that gets written about, which is the food that is remarkably good, okay, typically.
Yeah.
Most of the time when we eat, our deepest unconscious psychology isn't attempting to effectively use food as a form of status signaling or a form of, extraordinary entertainment. It's actually, is this okay to eat? Yeah, that's our evolutionary instinct. It's, basically, the great thing about I call this is called satisficing. Okay.
Yes.
And the reason McDonald's is so successful is not because it's the best restaurant in the world.
Yeah.
It's Nando's. It's because it's incredibly good at not being bad. So when you go there, you know what you get. It's going to be entirely expected. It's going to be very predictable. The bun has been toasted for 1 minute and 39 seconds. There are no surprises. It's exactly as it was last time. It's exactly what you expect it to be. And as a consequence, it's a very, very successful mind hack. Because, Nassim Taleb writes about this. He was baffled to see people eating at McDonald's at Milan railway station. Milan, pretty good foodie city. And the point was the people weren't looking for great food. They were looking for food that definitely wasn't bad.
But also that's that we talked about the promised land. So I eventually go to this KFC in Santa Marta and I'm craving it. The food arrives. I get the full shebang. I get wings. I get tenders. I get fucking everything. It was horrendously bad. The chicken was rank.
What, at KFC?
The KFC, and I was like, I couldn't believe it. But what in terms of like the promise, and then we're talking about like we want these things, the kind of what we've got in our head and the expectation to be met. With a chain, when it is kind of the
you have to be absolutely. This was, I suppose, Ray Kroc's great, insight. You have to be absolutely fascistically consistent in what you deliver.
Yeah.
And I mean, it might have been a fake KFC, or else the local franchisee has gone rogue.
I don't. But so then to your point, this one thing you notice when you try McDonald's or Burger King in a different country is you have the similarities of home, but the differences.
Yes.
And I've always found that how you keep consistency yet tailorize to localized markets. That conundrum's fascinating. I got McDonald's delivery on Rappi, which is their equivalent of Deliveroo.
Yeah.
I was like, I may as well have been ejaculating when I was eating it because it was so.
It was exactly.
It was like I could have gone down to the McDonald's in Liverpool Street. Do you know what I mean? It was exactly the same. I was like, and that is the promise I wanted. Do you know what I mean? Of course.
And and of course that's also true of hotel chains.
Yeah. That
we forget. If you're a frequent hotel stayer, quite often what you want is absolute predictability. You want to walk in and you know how the shower works. You don't have that battle of kind of confronting surprises or unexpected components to the experience. And actually, this concept of satisficing, which was coined by a guy called Herbert Simon, who's kind of polymath, won the Nobel Prize for economics, interestingly, but his a surprisingly interesting person to win the award, actually. But he interestingly made the point that in making decisions under uncertainty, his whole sort of shtick was decision-making under uncertainty, the avoidance of a negative probably looms larger than the attainment of a positive.
Yes. Yeah.
It is... It's a useful tool to understand human behavior because everybody in describing their own behavior always talks about, I chose this because it was the best. And actually, it probably isn't the best, okay? You buy a Samsung television, not because for the same money you might not be able to get you probably could get a slightly better television, but there's a 10%, 5%, whatever it is, risk with that other television that it might be a piece of shit.
Yes.
And actually avoiding buying a bad television is much more important, both in...
I think that's why Subway's successful, because, I mean, I will... So for example, with coffee, there's Pret, there's Gales, there's Black Sheep Coffee.
Yeah.
There's not many there's obviously sandwich chains like Pret.
Yeah.
There's not many sandwich chains other than Subway. So everyone going there is probably satisficing something.
Yes.
Because it's not like but whereas a sandwich shop could be, I mean, it's literally like that's one thing that hasn't it's literally a roll of the dice. You're in a new town, you fancy a sandwich. There isn't a Pret.
If you go to Subway, you know exactly what you're getting.
You know exactly what you're getting. You have kind of some kind of agency over what you put in it, whether you put...
Yeah, I think some fancy restaurants make the mistake of... I think you should have one or two unchanging staples on a menu.
Yep.
And maybe they make the mistake of being so keen to kind of, overstimulate their customers. But quite a lot of the time, actually, knowing that a restaurant has, well, if the worst comes to the worst, I can always have the X. Because I know, weirdly, interestingly,
Didn't you say right thing about a burger or something? Why the burger's the best seller or something?
Well, yeah, there's a wonderful phrase coined by a London ad agency called DDB Adam and Eve. And their phrase is what they call the burger effect, that when you look at a menu, once you've seen the burger, it's difficult to get past it.
Yes.
That's their view, that you have those things that are very sticky. It's interesting that nearly all places do a burger now, don't they? Because people who can't decide are always, it's rare to have a burger that's actually bad, not impossible. But there's also the thing I think that a lot of restaurants do. I stopped going to Wagamama because there were various things there that were absolute staples. I didn't always eat them, but I knew I always enjoyed them. There was something called Surendra's curry, which was fantastic. And there was a hot coconut-based noodle soup, which was quite spicy. I can't remember what the hell it was called now. But they took them both off the menu, since when I haven't been back to Wagamama in about 3 years. Because now I don't know whether, I go there and I go, well, there might not be anything I like there.
Yeah, it's crazy when they take away those things that you like, you love. So just back to these.
Actually, that's an interesting measure because restaurants don't have that metric. They know what's selling, okay, but they don't, unless they have a loyalty card, which I suppose KFC and McDonald's do, they don't know what's selling repeatedly. That's why supermarkets want a loyalty card, because if you talk to, for example, the people at Ocado, well, they don't need a loyalty card because they know exactly what everybody's buying. They actually apply two valuations to the items at Ocado. There's how much it sells, and there's how much it repeatedly sells to the same people.
Yeah.
So repeat purchase will keep something stocked at Ocado, even if the overall volume sales might not seem to justify it. And the reason for that is that, apart from anything else, if there's something you really like that you can only get at Ocado, you'll end up doing a whole £100 shop at Ocado just to get Irwin's soda bread. I don't know if you're a fan of soda bread.
That's
okay, there are a few things at Ocado. There are a few Korean things. There's a Korean hot sauce which Ocado sells. And 50% of the reason I order from Ocado is because I know I can get those things there and I can't get them anywhere else.
Yeah, that's why. So the bulk of our listeners are brands doing that. I actually think...
I think that's a really interesting thing. If you get something which is a staple...
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. So satisfying. Supermarkets are the mecca of... physical supermarkets are the mecca of satisficing. You have... go down a Lidl or a Waitrose or a Sainsbury's, most people, even if whether a young professional with a small basket or you're a mum with a big trolley and a toddler in the front, you're going through habitually buying the things, not 9 times out of 10. So you're getting the peanut butter you always buy.
Yep.
You're getting the sweet.
There are different segments. There is a segment with Ocado. I'll give away there, but there is a highly adventurous segment.
Yes.
Within the buying. And actually, of course, that will vary according to context as well.
Yes.
But a lot of the time, depending on your level of price constraint, your level of risk taking, you're absolutely right. Most people, most of the time, are, 50% of the population effectively lead a kind of hand-to-mouth existence. And this is something I'd like to do something about, where essentially life is a cash flow problem. It's not a wealth problem, it's a cash flow problem. And in that case, you have a very strong incentive to buy things that you've bought before, even more so if you have kids.
Yes.
Okay. So a rich household can try and get their kids to try new foods. And if they don't like the food, you can chuck it away. If you're a poor household, it's exactly the same with a cat. You don't take a risk with your brand of cat food. Because if you vary the brand of cat food and the cat just won't eat it, you've just wasted a few quid.
Yeah.
So you buy the same cat food. Same with kids.
So so in terms of the adoption curve, right? So you have brands who are starting, like the chocolate I sent you, and I can get you some more of that as well, by the way.
That was sensational.
So that's expensive. It's for Waitrose shopper, right?
Yeah.
It's adventurous. It's expensive. It's premium. So that brand may struggle. We'll get to a point where you probably get the hipsters who are buying it. You'll get the mums who've got money.
You also have a group of people that famously. One of the first things I learned, it must have been on my first week in advertising, sales of Fairy Liquid go up at Christmas because people have guests in the house and they want to be seen buying a premium brand. So people effectively affording hospitality will tend to uptick. They'll tend to premiumize, and they might go to a deli rather than just going to an ordinary shop.
Hi guys, super quick one. So excited. Look, for years I've been badgering on about Hungry the podcast. You're probably bored to death. Thanks for putting up with me. But Hungry is also an agency, and we look after one amazing brand called Island's Chocolate. We've had a great time over the year. We've won listings at a load of wholesalers. We've won Milk and More. We've got our first grocery listing coming very soon, which is very sick. But what I'm thrilled to announce is Hungry is merging with HC Consulting. My boy Harry Clark and his wonderful team, he's an absolute G. They do brand strategy, new business and account management. But why I really love working with Harry and why we've got on so well over the last couple of months is Harry was actually the founder of the boozy Iceland brand Pops. So he's been in the trenches, he's grafted his face off, he's had the sleepless nights, he's had the turmoil, he's had the triumph, he knows what it is to be a founder, he is a founder. And he's got a proven track record in grocery and out of home. Holy moly dips, the gut stuff, Savile drinks, Remio gelato. So if you're a brand and you're stuck, you're looking for new business help, you're looking to scale, drop us a message. We'd love to chat. Thank you so much. Back to the old episode.
Well, shopping now has changed. So
yeah.
It's kind of, again, back to this middle ground we've been talking about.
I actually had some people around, and I went to Gales to pick up an order just because people were just coming around for tea, and we wanted scones and everything. And they do pretty good scones. But Gales interest me because there's something wrong. The food product is pretty good, I think you'll agree. There's something wrong with their queuing system, isn't there? Do you experience the same thing? The whole thing is a bit of a mess. That you're not quite sure whether you actually take the bread off the shelf or whether you ask for the bread.
I think,
and then there are people in front of you who are asking for coffee, and if they have a large coffee order, it then holds you up.
Yeah. So
there's something fucked about that.
Yeah, but you know what? Last time we talked about gratuitous perversity.
Also, a lot of the people in Gales, the clientele. I like the brand. I like the business. The clientele are some fucking annoying people. Aren't they?
yeah.
They're the kind of Audi drivers of the.
I my local one's Cobham, so you get a lot of the Chelsea footballers, and you get it looks like a sort of a Botox horse.
What's going on there?
It's bizarre.
It is bizarre.
But one thing, they've done a couple of things well. So I think we were talking last time about gratuitous perversity. So doing something to kind of fuck people off, but it does psychologically, for some reason it does something well. The interesting one, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, I've often thought it was an interesting idea. There's this fantastic place, which is where Five Guys got the idea for their fries from. Yeah. They went and studied this place called Thrasher's in Ocean City, Maryland, which has 3 branches. It just sells fries. It sells them in a kind of pyramid you've told me about this. Yeah.
And the interesting thing, this is really weird if you think about it for the US, they don't give you ketchup. Yes. You can have vinegar and you can have salt, and that's it. Now, that's not so weird to Brits. For Americans, saying no ketchup, that's a real kind of weirdness. Doing these things that so on the Gales point is they want to feel. So I've interviewed the founder of Popham's Bakery, which is one of the best bakeries up in North London, but it's just 2 sites. 2 sites, got it. Yeah, 2 sites, and we were talking kind of before we hit record. Shouldn't mention them because venture capital will take it over and open 400 sites and then ruin it. No, because last time we were talking about how scale kills magic. We'll get onto that again in a sec. But one of the things I said to him, are you going to open any more sites? You've got 3 sites. He goes, no. We're going to keep these 3 bakeries, and we're going to do a brand bounce, which is go into something completely different. So what they've done is they've got the amazing fucking croissants and pastries and pastas that, again, due to scarcity, sells out perfectly on time at 1 p.m. every day, which means there's always queues, status, blah, 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 blah. Good concept, brand bounce, by the way. Brand bounce, but then what they've done... The example of brand bounce is Caterpillar, which make heavy earth-moving equipment moving into... But what they've done is they've gone into homeware.
because homeware is infinitely scalable. The Popham's brand is strong. People want a nice coffee cup to drink out of. And I was like, that's genius, because you could, logic would say, go and open another 10 sites around London.
And you can sell it online, which you can't do with baked goods, almost by definition.
Exactly. Yeah. But then, so that was their point. But what he was saying about Gales is their genius is that they feel outside of London, again, opening one in, I think they opened one, where did I see them open one? In, let's just say, and Cheshire's not the best example, but a city.
Seven Oaks, there's one.
Yeah, Seven Oaks. So that, Woking, there's one in Woking. That, in Woking, that feels like, oh my God, this is a neighbourhood bakery. So I think back to that gratuitous perversity point, is just like, maybe the kind of the fact it's a bit cataclysmic, the queuing system versus a Starbucks, adds a sort of neighbourhoodness to it, one. But then two, every single Gales looks different. So they're not carbon copy. So the one I was in Finsbury Park last week. That is totally different. That's all pink and neon. Versus the one in Cobham versus the one in Woking. So I think what they're trying to do is build this neighbourhood feel at scale.
We have this thing, because of course it's different outside London versus inside. And we have this chain in Kent called Elite Pubs, which is very similar, which is they're all, there is no common branding. You have to go to the website to discover which is an elite pub and which isn't. You know, if you were really, really alert, you'd probably recognise similarities. I mean, they don't, not everything's completely reinvented, but fundamentally they do quite a high degree of sort of customization to the individual building and the area. And so it's quite an interesting concept, because it has the economies of scale of a chain pub, but it has the appearance to the consumer of a local.
Do you know who's done this really well? Is Honest Burgers.
Interesting.
So actually, I should introduce you to him. So he's now doing a degree in behavioural economics. He's a fascinating guy, and he's creating a piece of AI.
They're very, very highly rated, aren't they? Extremely highly. I've never had one, actually.
You've never had Honest Burger?
No.
Mate, they're so good. But what they've done a few things that is again kind of, I've solved the scale kills magic conundrum. So first thing is they have the consistency of burgers. They have this kind of rule, which is 90% systems. So you have all the systems in place of a big restaurant. But then they have this almost 10% rule, which allows for a bit of fuckery. So they will let employees, even though they're not there, say in Honest in Brighton or Honest in Tooting, they, a bit like Julie Metcalf's give away a free coffee when you like. It's like they've got the agency to plop down a bottle of tequila and say, look, help yourselves, have a few shots. It keeps these magic. It could fuck up.
Because I remember always coming from a provincial background. I grew up in, a sort of small town in the Welsh borders. I went to university, and there was no university food on Sunday lunchtime, and a group of us got into the ritual of always going to Pizza Express. I always had the fear and Tina, I think. It was just every Sunday, basically went to lunch in Pizza Express. And the one thing I did grumble about after doing this for practically 2 years, admittedly only during term time, and what I didn't realise, of course, is to the people working there, we're a bunch of students here today, gone tomorrow. But at no point do they kind of recognise our regular custom by going, don't worry, you can have some free garlic bread. And I always thought, on visit number 10, that's getting a bit weird. You know what I mean? It was always absolutely fine. You always got exactly what you wanted. But it kind of, if you'd been there literally 10 weeks in a row, something in the natural human perception of value exchange and fairness and relatedness expects the acknowledgement of your past custom. And so it's a very sensible way they could, at Honest Burgers, just effectively use that discretionary thing is, if you have someone who comes back with their kids quite often, just give the kids a balloon or something.
They do other funny things as well. They again, back to gratuitous perversity, is they won't allow forks. So what Phil and Tom were saying to me...
Hold on, hit me with this.
So they won't allow forks. So because, again, it pisses customers off. They did a couple of things really well. So a bit, they realised...
How do you eat your fries?
With your hands. Their whole point, one of their values is food.
Oh, okay.
Food is connected. They believe when you eat something with your hands, it connects your food to your soul. And he was
Do
saying,
they give you wipes afterwards?
I think they give you wipes, but they've got, again, it's gratuitous, but it doesn't really make sense. But they were saying there was absolute uproar when they opened in Chiswick. You can imagine all the kind of the pushchair mums and the investment banks on the weekend going, where are the fucking fools? Do you know what I mean? So they do that, but then this is where it gets really interesting.
Because that was my weird thing about opening bacon sandwich.
Yes.
Where you would offer brown sauce but no ketchup.
Exactly.
Out of sheer willful perversity.
Exactly.
And it's a bit of a kind of mini Marco Pierre White, isn't it? Which is if people ask for salt or pepper, he'd have an absolute wobbly, you see.
Exactly.
And it's actually a little bit of saying, it's a way of signalling that we have our own opinion about this food and we're doing this for reasons other than simple, naked capitalist greed. In other words, not being completely customer focused in certain things does have, I mean, I don't recommend it as a default position. I don't recommend that, organizations become willfully perverse all the time in everything. It would get really, really annoying. But it's something you can deploy, you have to do it in a limited way.
The other thing they do is to keep the localization and keep the feeling of we are not a chain, even though they're at 50 sites, is every single Honest Burger site will have a unique burger local to that. So Manchester will have cheese from Lancashire.
I like that.
Yeah, which is, and he said to me, he goes, our accountant hates us because we're doing for this fucking one burger, which we may not sell part of. And I was like, and he was like, but we don't care. We want that.
Waitrose does that actually. So in Waitrose in Wales, not that there are many of them, there's one in Monmouth. They have the little local produce aisle, which is really nice. And it actually got into private eye because someone wasn't paying much attention to shelf stacking. And it said local Welsh produce. And there were a load of bananas, which don't grow very well in Wales,
Really?
to be absolutely honest. But I don't know where they got that idea from. But and those kind of little bits of, and actually you'll see that in the design being adopted by Starbucks when they open new stores.
In what house?
Well, they've gone from in a sense. Okay, if it's a bit like McDonald's playing around with its logo by using it for directions. First on the left, and then use the golden arch as just a kind of arrow. When you're very well established, you can afford, and in fact it's beneficial to play around with your own sense of identity. In other words, you abandon the absolutely rigorous algorithmic attention to rules in design, and you do variations on a theme. And so what Starbucks is doing is, if they open a Starbucks in New Mexico now, it won't look like a Starbucks in Connecticut. They'll deliberately add some local elements or some customization. Now, it's worth noting that you shouldn't be doing that in the early stages, perhaps. But when you are established, you can afford to have that kind of, to play fast and loose with your own kind of rules a little bit.
That's the one thing I was going to ask you, actually, is, do you know Charlie Munger, who's...
Of course. He died recently, unfortunately. One of the greats.
One of his rules that I absolutely love is this inversion rule. So basically...
always invert.
Always invert, yeah. And I was writing about this in my newsletter. So he does the famous commencement speech at the University of Southern California, and he basically says... he's asked to do a talk to a kind of bug-eyed, wide-eyed American students. And he goes, this is how to live a life of misery. And I think the 5 things, he's like, inhale alcohol and chemicals, be resentful and envious, be unreliable, and don't stand on the shoulders and do not stand on the shoulders of others, i.e. learn from others' mistakes. Do those 5 things and you'll live a life of misery. So the whole point is his famous quote is wisdom is prevention. So if you avoid those things, you will live a good life. And I've been thinking about that. So I've added some for myself, is I rush everywhere. So when I rush, I'm just like, I'm not enjoying my life, basically. So one of my things, if I rush everywhere. But I would love to apply this to brand building in food. So what would you say... if we're using the rule of inversion, what other ways a brand could absolutely fuck itself? So say we were trying to how could Coca-Cola essentially dismantle themselves with the inversion rules? What were the things they'd have to do?
This is similar to a game that was invented.
A bit closer than
this is similar to a game that was invented by a guy called Jeremy Bullmore, I think, who was a great creative guy at the agency J. Walter Thompson. and he called this brandicide, which is...
I love that.
In order to discover what a brand is, one useful mode of inquiry is what you might call to decide what the brand isn't. And all I can remember is, you've got to remember this was the 1980s, and you had After Eight mints as a sort of premium after-dinner mint sold by Rowntree's in the little individual envelopes, you know that.
Yeah, I know, I love them, yeah.
And the question was, what would you do if you wanted to kill the After Eight brand? And the first suggestion was you introduce After Eight chewing gum. Okay, you move the brand in. And then someone decided they thought that actually an upmarket mint-flavoured chewing gum might actually do quite well. And then someone else suggested After Eight bubble gum. Okay, and that's the kind of piece of brandicide. You know, it's so totally inappropriate to what the brand is about. And what's interesting about McDonald's actually is that it has innovated significantly, but it's always gone to the adjacent possible. So the mistake that McDonald's hasn't made is it's introduced screen ordering and it's introduced table service, but it hasn't removed face-to-face ordering, and it hasn't removed order at the counter. Now, what a lot of supermarkets have done is they've gone, God, it's cheaper to actually have self-service checkout, self-checkout than it is to have people. So we're going to have really few tills and we're going to have loads and loads of self-service checkout. Okay. Now, I think, this is an example of where I think companies get it really badly wrong, which is there are whole areas of company decision-making which are made by procurement or by the finance function with no input from marketing, which are made entirely on the basis of financial expediency with no consideration given for the customer experience. So an example of this is when you park at my local M&S. Now, M&S has got a lot of things right recently, and they're undoubtedly on a bit of a roll. The new chief executive, who comes from a very strong lifetime retailer, what
do you think they've got right? Like, because I know
quality of food, the clothing. They've finally started to crack clothing. I think they still make a few mistakes. I think the way in which they decorate and lay out the clothing stores is fundamentally inimical to selling premium goods. Okay? Yeah. There are certain rules in premium fashion, which is, if you're paying over the odds for something, you want carpets and you don't want industrial lighting above your head. And when you pay your 80 quid, you want a rope handle bag. And I think Marks and Spencer's could learn from that. There are certain just heuristic rules, that, you'll always notice this. The first rule of being an upmarket Turkish restaurant is you don't sell doner kebabs, right? Mm-hmm. Which slightly annoys me because I really like the doner kebab. I think it's a great thing. Yeah. But it's now, what happens at M&S in Sevenoaks is that no one with a marketing or customer focused mindset has any say in this decision. And someone says, who are we going to get to run the car park? Because we can't make the car park free, because if we do, people just park there all day and go shopping in Sevenoaks or work in Sevenoaks, and the car park will be full. So they obviously go to the person who offers the highest bid to manage the car park. Okay, if you let us collect the money, we'll pay you a certain amount of money to manage this car park. The person who offers the highest bid is almost certainly likely to be the person most ready to issue fines to people for overstaying. Or in this case, what happens is, now, bear in mind, I'm not criticizing M&S here. I'm simply showing it as an exemplar of what even really good brands do, where they get it wrong by handing decisions out to people who are purely motivated by the financial side of the question and have no responsibility for the consumer experience. And that would be the people who put in lots and lots of self-checkout tills, which has now led to an epidemic of shoplifting. Yes. But those people can lay claim to the financial saving, but they're not around to be responsible for the adverse consequences. Apart from anything else, in Waitrose and Sevenoaks, quite a lot of people, it's a fairly minted area, do a whole weekly shop there. It's quite difficult to do a whole weekly shop in a self-checkout till.
Have you seen...
You need a trolley, you need a bloody... I do the self-scanning, but there are a lot of people who are over 60. They don't want to get an app and scanning your own groceries with a bloody mobile phone is a pain in the arse anyway, because you need 3 hands, okay? Now, in the M&S car park, you come in, you pay, you use the app to pay for an hour, and the app says you have an hour left. You drive out after precisely an hour, and then you get issued a fine through the post because number plate recognition. Why? Because the number plate recognition system judges your duration of parking from entry to exit, not from the moment you pay. Now, obviously, if you're a bit slow getting out of the car, you pay 2 or 3 minutes later than you actually enter the car park, right?
Yeah.
Now, in every single car park, whether it's pay and display, whether it's an app or whatever, which is normally policed by a human being, if you pay for an hour, you've got an hour from the moment you pay, right? They don't count the 4 minutes you were dicking around finding the ticket machine or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But in this system, because it's done by ANPR, they'll issue a fine if you arrive, pay 3 minutes later, and then leave 60 minutes later. Now, locally, on my local next door, that's driving people apoplectic. That, for a long time, I think this is now, they've finally got rid of it. No, it may still be the case. In that same store, you needed £1 to have a trolley. Now, nobody carries fucking coins anymore, right? I do not have £1 on my person at this moment. I might have one in the car, if I remember. Those are the kind of utterly ridiculous things that even great brands do. Utterly ridiculous, because what you've got to remember is that even if 95% of your customers 95% of the time are really happy, if you enrage someone 3 times in a row, you lose a customer almost for life.
And so that's another back.
And they're not looking at the long-term consequences of doing what they've done. They're simply looking at the short-term cost savings. And that's the real way to kill any brand, which is to focus so narrowly on short-term financial expediency that you forget the fact that you're in a relationship. So that will be a case where, for example, a restaurant business, nobody expects, a personal welcome in a motorway service station. There are places like McDonald's which are relatively impersonal, okay? But failing to recognize people and just failing to recognize the nature of a relationship so that each transaction basically starts from scratch, that's one really big failing I think you can. I mean, the other one is simply by anything you do that diminishes the. I'll go back to the scarf model. Okay, there's this great model, neuroscientist David Rock, and the model of things that humans care about that aren't really quantified and aren't well understood by economists. It's SCARF, which stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. And people care about those things to the depth of their being. If you do something in a restaurant which is an affront to someone's status, effectively, that will arouse far more ire and likelihood of a boycott than having slightly bad food.
What are the other ones?
Status certainty.
So what does it mean by that?
That's kind of like predictability. A good example of certainty would be signs on the tube platform which say next tube 7 minutes. Okay,
in restaurants, so
we'd rather. I mean, if we're at an airport and it says flight delayed 47 minutes, we go, flight delayed 47 minutes. I'll go and go and have a drink, or I'll go to the lounge or whatever. Okay, if it just says delayed, we're in a state of uncertainty.
Yes,
we find that inordinately more painful.
Yes,
than we've so quite often you can manage a downside in advance. I mean, there's a huge difference if you think about it between being handed a menu and being told that the hake's off the menu, and then versus ordering hake and then 10 minutes later they come back and say the hake's off the menu.
Oh my God! I listened to a podcast with a Michelin star chef, and they go through their food icks, and that's one of the icks in terms of managing expectations.
It's like, totally fine. You hand someone a menu and say, "I'm terribly sorry."
But for some reason, apparently in loads of restaurants, they say that the staff know from day dot that there's no fucking hake, right? But they still go around the tables and say, order. The person orders, the expectation becomes here.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you'll go to the kitchen, come back.
I mean, the brilliant book, you must have read the book by Will Guidara called Unreasonable Hospitality.
So I tried to get him on the podcast, actually. And in terms of hospitality, because
that brilliant observation that the things you deliver that the person wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
That you have, in a sense, the mind of a game theorist with the customer, not the mind of a kind of a rule follower.
What do you mean by the mind of a game theorist?
I loved the way in which he went to, one of the best restaurants in the world and said, okay, all of this was, as you'd expect, absolutely amazing, but where could we do better than them? We can't do better than them on the food because their food is already top notch. But he said, when I ordered coffee at the end of the meal, it was just bog standard coffee. And he went and appointed one of his staff as kind of like the coffee sommelier, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And got in some massive, Pavoni cappuccino machine. He also appointed, I think, one of the waiters as their beer guy. Yeah. Because he said that all these restaurants wank on about wine endlessly.
Yeah.
But 20% of people prefer beer.
Yeah, we were talking about this last time.
And so there were these sort of craft breweries who are literally so delighted. They were more or less sending them free beer, I think, because they were so delighted that a leading New York restaurant had finally decided to take beer seriously.
But also, I like about that book, he talks about the story.
I'd much rather have a conversation with a beer sommelier than the wine sommelier, because wine conversations are kind of wanky, aren't they? Whereas beer conversations...
Yeah, well, that's like the status game in like all its tomfoolery, isn't it?
You've never had Joe Fattorini?
He's coming on.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I will give a pre-plug here for someone I consider one of the greatest exponents of, particularly of drink and behavioural science, in that he's utterly brilliant in his knowledge of both. And so he's fascinating on either topic, but when the two topics overlap, it's absolutely pure magic.
Yeah, well, because I think he lives in Stockholm now. So he was.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he did something weird like that.
In fact, I'm going to message him after this. So he's coming on. But the other thing I like about what Will does is he talks about the story of the remembering something about how like a significant fact. And he realizes the story of the couple who've been in New York, and they're in this Union Square.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
And then he brings out, someone goes around the back and brings around one of those shitty hot dogs from the hot dog stand, goes to them and says, oh, here's a hot dog, but they put it on like a nice plate.
That's it.
It doesn't make sense. It's like a juxtaposition of a shitty hot dog from a burger stand with sweaty onions on a Michelin-style plate. But at that moment of magic, you can't create. Again, in terms back to the self-checkout thing and sort of the perversity of it, do you know Booth's, a retailer up north?
Yeah.
In total, a bit like the coffee thing of like, okay, what's the Achilles heel in our competitors, or like, where are they? What's their strength that could be their weakness? So Booth's, I think, back in the last year, got rid of all self checkouts.
Interesting.
And I think they're only 30. They're about 20 stores all up north.
They make their own food, because I've got a vague memory that they sell to Amazon Fresh. Is that right? I think you get Booth's kind of
what? Yeah.
They've got their own brand of certain foodstuffs.
Why? What? Sorry. One more. We'll go back to the. Can we just go back to the scarf thing? So we've done status, consistency,
autonomy. Now, an example of that would be people prefer a table they've chosen to a table that's imposed on them, even if it's the same table. Okay. So one nice thing a restaurant can do is say, where would you rather sit? Or you can have any of these three tables. People are just happier with that. Not because necessarily they get to choose the table. Well, sorry, not because they wouldn't have chosen the table you would have allocated them anyway, but simply because the act of making the choice you like something you've chosen more than something that's imposed on you.
Yeah.
Okay, even if it's the same thing. Okay, yeah. It's why we used to work with Ford, and Ford always had lower customer satisfaction figures than a few competitors. And we had to explain that, and they got annoyed because they couldn't get this satisfaction figure above a certain amount, even though they'd made the cars better and better and better. And we had to explain it's because so many of your customers are fleet customers. They haven't chosen a Ford. They've been told they're driving a Ford, and it's not the same. Even if you would have chosen a Ford, you won't like a car as much if your employer tells you that's the car you've got to drive versus if you've chosen that car. So that's autonomy. People don't like being railroaded or tram-railed. Relatedness, you could actually, a better phrase might be reciprocality or relationship, which is people don't like a series of standalone transactions. They like an acknowledgement of their past custom, and so treating regular customers differentially better than you treat treat people who are just in off the street. And, at scale, that's a loyalty program, perhaps, but in an independent restaurant, it's simple recognition. Simple as that. And then fairness is fairness. What really pisses people off is that those people got their food first, but they ordered after we did. those kind of things really, really upset people.
Yes.
Now, it might be that the thing you've ordered is a completely different thing. But again, you can overcome that by pre-warning people in advance, perhaps.
One thing I want to ask you about is the Rick Rubin podcast.
Yeah.
Because I think you were here like the day before you flew out to do that podcast in Italy. I thought it was amazing. And Rick Rubin.
It was actually 5 hours edited down to about 3.5. Yeah, the conversation went on for ages.
Yeah, he's. I mean, I think
he's absolutely brilliant.
What? So, few things on that. I suppose the first thing is, well, he's got a quote which I love, and I think it's so applicable to marketing. Is the audience comes last. And this is so applicable in music, right? So in music, the audience comes last. It's like if David Bowie or John Lennon had done market research and they put the audience first, you wouldn't have Ziggy Stardust. So
you'd have Skiffle Band.
Yeah. And well, I think when the audience comes first, the prime example of this, and this is why it's shite, is the X Factor. That. Other than maybe that's when it's all like decision by committee, isn't it? Really, like it's voting.
Yeah, that's interesting because you get two weirdly opposite things. You get the curse of averaging.
Yes,
but you also sometimes get. I mean, which let's face it, the Beatles were beneficiaries of this. You also get kind of collective insanity as well, and the Beatles undoubtedly. But you also get those weird effects where people are hugely influenced by everybody else around them, and you get the sort of fashionable effect. But the idea that more people collectively make better decisions is both true and wrong. It's complicated. So how you design decision making is and what one of the interesting things about the dynamics of decisions, I always jokingly say, unless you're by the sea, never open a fish restaurant.
Yes.
Because there's always somebody there who doesn't want to eat fish. Okay? And, you have that's the thing called minority rule, where if everybody else is pretty indifferent, but one person will only do B and won't do A, everybody ends up doing B.
It's like why everything's kosher certified.
That's why all soft drinks are kosher, are effectively kosher, because it's not worth Coke maintaining a separate supply chain for kosher Coke. So I don't know what the mechanism is.
Because the quote that's, or not the quote, it's just something I think about a lot, which is the famous David Ogilvy quote, which is, there's no statues of committees.
Yeah.
Which is almost like the audience comes last.
So, I mean, if you're using a committee to bring out possible problems, if you're exploiting a good book by Matthew Syed on this called Rebel Ideas, if you're looking for dissenting opinion, if you're looking for diversity of opinion, and you're acknowledging that in your decision-making process, then a group of people can be... Now, David Ogilvy, for example, before he sent out any body copy for approval, would show it to sort of 12 different people for their suggestions. So it isn't the idea that one person on their own without a sounding board is necessarily perfect and you shouldn't be influenced at all by the opinions of others. But at the same time, average opinion, for example,
bad.
It can often be very, very bad. You end up appealing to nobody because nobody's really that average,
Yeah, so that because I think in your book, and it's like innovation happens at extremes. So it's like, as you say,
it's the edges.
It's the edges. The edges. Sorry, is
no, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
Is kind of the antithesis of that is the X factor, which is obviously the outliers, as Harry Styles, etc. But the bulk of it is this kind of move to the middle, move to average, move to kind of committee based decisions. When in terms of food, I'm just trying to think of examples of like how like new ideas can bubble up, or how people can go about thinking about creating new brands. So, for example, an example of where the audience comes last could be kombucha.
Kombucha
is an example,
or indeed, of course, the original McDonald's, because it had an incredibly limited menu. It was effectively an imposition on because the thing that it was replacing was American diner culture, where you had a huge menu with eggs over easy, everything was customized, okay? And McDonald's effectively took the bet that people would actually sacrifice choice for speed. And so they had a system which allowed you to prepare the food in advance of it being requested.
That's crazy. crazy.
And so when you think about it, nothing seems remotely subversive about McDonald's now, obviously, because it's established it. Well, actually, I mean, KFC predates McDonald's. It's not the original. Burger King, I think. No, hold on. The Whopper is older than the Big Mac, but I think McDonald's might be older than Burger King, if I'm right. But when it first started, McDonald's was a deeply subversive. It was almost an example of beginner's mind, that these people...
Beginner's mind.
That's a phrase in the Rick Rubin podcast. It's a Buddhist concept that sometimes you get remarkable innovation from people who are new to a field, and their ignorance is actually a strength, not a weakness.
Yes.
Because they don't think to automatically do things the way that everybody else did them.
Yes.
There were certain practices in restaurant management which were deeply enshrined. And of course, McDonald's broke most of those rules. That you must be able to ask for your eggs to be made. They're made on demand. And McDonald's, by effectively shrinking down the menu massively to about 5 items, I think, originally, went completely in the opposite direction.
Yeah, so the opposite of a good idea is a good idea.
It's a good idea.
Yeah,
Exactly that. Yeah.
So with the Rick Rubin podcast, what did you...
The kombucha is an interesting idea, and I have to confess that someone came to me about 10 years ago and thought there was a potential market for this fermented tea drink, which was popular in, I can't remember where it is, Mongolia or something.
It was China.
It was China, yeah. I remember thinking, good luck with that one.
Well, it's crazy, but that's the great example of where the audience comes last. And I'm trying to think almost... So the other one would be Little Moons.
By the way, I don't really understand those.
Yeah, well, so
what's the appeal? I don't get it. I buy them, but my kids seem to like them, but I don't really get the whole thing. What's it about?
But that's
it's like bubble tea. I can't decide whether bubble tea is a valuable addition to my beverage repertoire or a load of old bollocks. I really can't.
I've never had bubble tea. That's never really.
It's worth a try. In hot weather, particularly, I can see the value of it. And actually having a kind of stimulant drink which is cold and it's quite interesting.
The thing I find weird is kimchi.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I love it, but the thought of
But then think about this. I think quite a lot of food is the beneficiary of associations rather than the food itself. I've always thought about sushi, okay, it comes from Japan. We know Japan has a very sophisticated and eccentric food culture. And yet, if sushi didn't exist, and you're watching TV and you're told that these poor people who are refugees in some African country were reduced to such poverty, they're reduced to eating raw fish wrapped in rice with a bit of leaf around it, you wouldn't go, what an exciting culinary opportunity. You go, poor sods, I hope that never happens to me.
Yes.
And so, the other one that always baffles me is that soup thing with a leaf in it that you get in Japanese restaurants.
Miso soup.
Miso soup. If Heinz brought that out, everybody would go, what the hell are they thinking? A stupid leaf in the thing. It doesn't really taste of anything. There are a few white lumps in the bottom because it's Japanese.
What I don't get on that...
Different rules apply.
On that association thing is when I was travelling, is I met a lot of people who found the concept of an English breakfast utterly repugnant.
So these people...
they were Canadians...
Canadians have a kind of English
That's what I was basically saying, but
Canadian bacon is not bacon.
Yeah, well,
it's a lie. It is not bacon. It's taken from a completely different part of the pig, and it doesn't deserve
They're
to be
like,
called bacon.
you guys have beans on your breakfast?
Oh, that beans thing is uniquely... It's very, very weirdly... The whole baked bean thing is a weird British outlier.
Really?
So the beans thing would strike them as completely bizarre. And of course, there are full English breakfast purists in the UK who regard the beans as an aberration, that you shouldn't have them.
Oh,
My
really?
view is that if they're in a separate pot, it's acceptable. And then you can merge them with the whole if you want to. But you shouldn't just put beans on a full English breakfast adjacent to the other items.
That's an interesting thing back on the food hipsters.
But then I went to Spain and they have donuts for breakfast. And that struck me as the most repulsive thing I've ever seen, because the idea of having something sweet for breakfast just doesn't... in the British mindset, doesn't feature at all, does it? I mean, that's weird.
Yeah, that's...
Pop-Tarts might have made a little bit of progress. But other than that, I can't think of... generally we want our breakfast to be savoury.
Yeah, but what I don't understand... But a lot of these hipsters is almost like a weird status play here, is like, if you go to have a posh full English with the beans in the little ramekin.
The ramekin.
Yeah, like that's suddenly not cool. It's like you've got to go to the there's that whole thing now on social media, which is like going around to the best kind of greasy spooner. Like they're
no, I'm glad. You see, I'm glad we've discovered that because there's Nell's just off the A2, not far from Gravesend, M2.
Nell's.
It's a brilliant transport cafe, and it just it's just off the motorway in Kent. Really, I'm really glad that the really good breakfast, the British breakfast food, has had a well-deserved renaissance because. I think it might have been George Bernard Shaw or someone who said it's very easy to eat well in the UK. You just have breakfast 3 times a day. And of course, the 2 meals at which the British really excelled were breakfast and tea. Lunch and dinner, we've got to effectively surrender to other cuisines. Not for everything. Pies, for example. I mean, that's extraordinary. The French for a pie is un pie. They haven't got their own word for pie, and so the fully enclosed pie. That's a miraculous.
So I interviewed a guy who had a pie restaurant in London at the Rosewood. Did you ever go to the Pie Room?
I heard about it. I never went there.
It's a fascinating guy. So he talked to me all about the history of pies.
Yeah,
and he was saying pies were back in the day. Like now we've got chicken shops. They were everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were absolutely everywhere. How the
pie and mash? You would have had.
So the pie and mash
gravy. Yeah,
like the eels and shit like that.
Yeah.
How would you, if I was to say to you, right, Rory, you've got to kind of give pie and mash shops. I'm talking like the East End ones, like a renaissance, and like put them on the same because they're dying. How do they come back?
I think that would succeed if you just gave it a twist.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to work.
I don't know what the twist is offhand, but I think you could actually you could revive that quite easily because, again, it's rather like my bacon sandwich idea. If you just focus on one thing, people assume that if you only do one thing, you're going to do it pretty well. Okay, and therefore, if you create the brand world of pies, as it were. I think you could. There are many places where that could succeed.
Yeah,
I need to think about the margins. You'd have to do something really weird with the pricing, like the pie cost 15 quid, or maybe not that much, but the pie cost a lot of money. But then the mash is free. You do a whole load of weird things with that. You do weird ththings with the pricing.
You could almost create a weird story around the fucking crust.
Yeah.
It's a bit like how
I always joke about this, that the British have very good food, but it all has to be portable. So we invented the sandwich, we invented the pie, we invented the pasty. If you want your food to be portable, there's nothing to touch this country. Everything. And of course, the Cornish pasty was a mining device that you took it because you had to eat it with your hands, and you had to take it down the mine.
The sandwich was the Earl's sandwich. It was gambling.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was like gambling, and he wanted something quick to eat. Out of all the,
I loved it because there was a sandwich. A McDonald's has just opened outside Sandwich in a kind of gas station complex, and they put up a big poster saying, "Hello, Sandwich, welcome to your new restaurant." And I thought there's a beautiful circularity to this, which is the town which gave rise to the Earl, which gave rise to the concept of the sandwich, which effectively essentially gave rise to the burger, and then finally McDonald's comes back to Sandwich. It's like.
Is the burger
going full circle?
Is the burger from Germany hamburger?
God. The Frankfurter is definitely German. In fact, they have to be honest, a slightly unhealthy affection for those slightly weird pork sausages, don't they?
They're fucking rank.
Well, there's a thing called currywurst in Germany, which if you get it done well can be okay. Who was it who wrote that absolutely scathing review of the German doner kebab? That was
Charles Corrin.
Charles Corrin,
yeah. I read that.
And the one thing I entirely agree with him about is the fucking kebab is a lamb-based meal, right? Because the Germans don't seem to eat lamb at all. I don't know why. Lamb consumption is really weird, okay? Because Americans don't eat lamb at all.
Really?
No, obviously New Zealanders and Australians unsurprisingly eat a lot of lamb. And I was at this quite sophisticated dinner with, the odd Nobel Prize winner kicking around, and the host was Lebanese. And so one of the things they served were effectively Lebanese skewered kebabs of lamb. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And these Americans, these were seriously like professors at Ivy League universities going, I'm like eating a sheep here. Like I'm actually consuming sheep. I was going, what the fuck are these people? I grew up in Wales, right?
Yeah.
It's a staple meat. But the the doner kebab should be a fucking lamb, should be a lamb-based thing, right?
What?
And the German doner kebab apparently is beef or chicken. What the fuck's going on there?
Yeah, that is crazy. So I went to Berlin once, and the kebabs there are extraordinary. Because they have it in like a focaccia bread, which is just out of this world.
They got a very clever gimmick, the GDK, which is the waffle bread, which is a clever gimmick.
Yes.
But Giles Corrin absolutely hated it, didn't he? He hated it too.
Yeah. He has those ways. One thing, so with your book, and this is more for like kind of our listeners who analyze data to make decisions.
Before I do anything else, I just need to check the timing. I'm sure she said 6.
Oh, Stewie.
I suddenly had a panic when I saw 5 o'clock, just in case. So then
I'm pretty, yes. Anna texted me saying it was 6.
And you're right, it's 6.
Yeah.
Okay, I can relax. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we'll probably wrap up or if you want, actually, just so whilst I wrap up, you can go into that. Everyone will be gone by now. Anyway.
Okay, that's super. No, I'll be fine. Whatever.
So the so I've obviously read your book. It's absolutely amazing, and I know that.
Let me tell you why I find food so interesting. Okay, it's because comedy tends to be very good because there's very rapid feedback. Okay, you learn very quickly whether you're funny or not, and that's because of laughter. Okay, if people aren't laughing, or worse still, are throwing things at you, you know very quickly you failed. Now imagine how difficult it is, let's say, to hone a comedic set with an imaginary audience which is very, very slow, very poor sense of humour, so they laugh 5 minutes after you tell a joke. Much more difficult to become good at comedy is you get slow feedback versus if you get fast feedback. Now, what's so interesting about the restaurant, the QSR category, the food category, is it's a fast feedback category. You learn very quickly whether you've got something right. Not immediately, it's not like comedy, but you learn very quickly whether you've got something right or whether you've got something wrong. And I think this is why I think Will Gadara's book is so important, because I think he's learnt lessons in the restaurant industry much faster than he would have done if he'd been in the banking industry, for example. If you want to know what keeps most people stay with their bank for 15 years. So when you do some customer service innovation in banking, it's literally kind of 7 years before you really know whether it works or not. Whereas the restaurant industry learns from its failures very, very fast. And so as a result, in kind of Darwinian terms, I think it's really, really interesting because it's an industry. By the way, bear in mind that on the site of most successful restaurants, 5 previous restaurants have failed. So it's a very, very Darwinian world. But what I think you could do if you're a bank is look at what the best restaurants do and copy it.
Because one thing I loved on your Chris Williamson podcast is when you talked about how comedians are essentially evolutionists or like... what did you say?
Effectively, there are very few bad comedians. There are comedians I don't like. Okay?
Yeah.
They're obviously not bad comedians because they're filling stadia. Okay.
Yeah.
There are comedians I don't find funny at all. I won't name them, but I mean, but nevertheless, okay. You know very quickly whether generally. You can practice and perfect and hone your comedic routine because you know when it's working and when it isn't.
Yeah, but it's a
very Darwinian thing in the sense that, the bad comedians either change what they're doing completely or they get out.
Yeah, so there's a link to evolution with that.
Yeah.
What would you say is the link to evolution in food? Because another example of this is you can almost say vegan meat is like a weird
It's also
spasm.
Because you are contending with really weird changing fashions if you think about it. I mean, when I first ate sushi, bear in mind it would have been about 1990, 1991, I found the whole concept, repellent. Okay, and now it's a mainstream food, which, the Sainsbury's in Sevenoaks has its own sushi bar, for example. You have extraordinary changing fashions. It's effectively an accelerated microcosm of the marketplace, from which you can learn more precisely because change happens so quickly and because people respond so quickly.
But also,
I just find it, the whole invention of things like gusto, for example, fascinate me,
Yes.
Because gusto really intrigues me because, as I said, when I first learned of the concept, it didn't really make any sense to me. I go, well, why would you do that when you can just get a cookbook, get a recipe, order the ingredients, make the food? What's Gusto doing that actually adds to that? Well, logically, nothing. But it turns out that when the food arrives the ingredients arrive in exactly the same ratio, you do end up making it, and you do end up enjoying it a lot more than you would have done an equivalent ready meal for less money, probably, with, undoubtedly, better taste.
On the individualistic level, I think, and I'm interviewing Seth Godin. Have you ever met Seth Godin?
No, I've never met him. I'm quite a big fan. I mean, actually, his book Purple Cow years ago,
It's so good, yeah.
was probably one of the sort of 2 or 3 books which kind of flipped my brain. Back in this would have been the sort of late 90s, I guess.
Yeah, so interviewing him week after next. But
fantastic.
Yeah, which I'm really looking forward to. But he's obsessed with cooking. And he says there's a lot of parallels between cooking and marketing, and I think, or alchemy. I mean, there's literally alchemy in fucking cooking.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you'll get your. I believe.
Combinatorial genius. Yeah.
I believe a bowl of ramen is a good analogy for good or bad organizations. So
because it can be rubbish, can't it?
Well, no, but essentially you have the egg, you have all the moving parts, which is the egg, the. Do you want to check that?
No, I don't know what that was. I think that might have been the TV, actually.
So you have the egg, the pork, the noodles, the veg. Individually, they're okay. The culture, I believe the culture for an organisation is the broth. You pour the broth on that fucker and everything comes together and those parts start moving. Yeah. And I think broth...
And it's orchestrated.
It's orchestrated. So but I think the broth is the analogy of what culture is. You can take these dear things. No broth, nothing works. Broth, culture works. Culture is almost like the broth that brings...
That's a brilliant analogy. You're right, absolutely right, which is it enables... What a culture does, it enables people who are of themselves not necessarily that remarkable and in some respects very different to come together in a cohesive whole.
Yeah, because if you don't have the egg, I think the squidgy egg is, if you gave me, imagine I was to give you a squidgy egg, which has been dunked in tea, you'd be what the fuck is that? Yeah. Suddenly you put it with the broth and it just all works. And
there's a Korean thing, dolsot bibimbap, which is the rice in the hot bowl. And that's an interesting thing because it arrives looking immaculate, and then you mess it all up with your chopsticks and add and the chili sauce is actually the unifying force there, which is absolutely a remarkable thing.
But what Seth talks about is how cooking when you're cooking for yourself is this kind of you approach this problem, which is I need to cook a meal, and you get that really fast feedback we were talking about, which is I've got X in the cupboard. Yeah. I need to put this together. Does it work? Yes or no? How can it be improved? And it's that in terms of
that's of course
evolution.
Back to my original point, which is start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
Yes, yeah. But evolution, you're like, okay, I put too much chili sauce in that fajita, for example. Next time I'll do less. So is that rapid feedback? But I think the cooking and food. That's why I'm endlessly fascinated.
It's very interesting to look at the origins of things. I love the fact that there is actually, he's dead now, but there was actually a guy called Nacho, after whom nachos are named. So the guy was called, I think Nacho is the Spanish short form of Ignacio. And he was called Ignacio. He ran something just south of the Texas border in Mexico. Some women, I think, might have been military wives came in who'd crossed the border for the day. And they were hungry, but he'd run out of ingredients. And he got some cornbread and then cooked it to a crispiness, covered it with cheese and whatever he had left over. And he was actually the original. So nachos are called nachos because of a guy called Nacho.
Fuck, that's amazing, yeah.
Right? It was sometime south of, I think there's a place called Eagle Pass, Texas. And just south of the Mexican border, I think I've got this right, there's this guy called Ignacio, Nacho, always known as Nacho, who effectively is the absolute godfather of that. And it came out of necessity as well. It came out of him not having enough food left over at the end of the day, but these people wanting something to eat. So he effectively melts cheese and a few other things over these corn chips.
I love the stories in food as well. So one thing Seth Godin has, and I know we've talked about kind of evolution, and food and marketing. Seth had a background in kind of philosophy. How would you say? And he's got a quote which I'm going to ask him. He says, "Marketing is humanity. Humanity is marketing." I was like, I don't know what he means.
That's a big claim.
Yeah.
That's vulgar. No, but emphatically, what you have to be preoccupied with as a marketer is the human dimension, and you have to be disproportionately obsessed with it, because those human factors, whether they're psychological, perceptual, whatever, tend to get averaged out or lost in the process of running a larger and larger business. Now, I always think, if you grow up in a restaurant or a shop or a cafe, it's like a free MBA, right? Because you understand all the components of a business. You understand, supply, logistics, you understand pricing, you understand margins, but you also understand the human factor. You can't afford to run a shop or a cafe. That's why Margaret, it's only a coincidence that Rishi Sunak and Margaret Thatcher both grew up in shops. Because it gives you an understanding of how a complex system works in its entirety. Now, what tends to happen is you get people who just go to school, go to university, and then they get a job in finance or procurement or whatever. They understand the part that they're trying to optimize, but they don't understand how to optimize the whole.
So back to the honest burger.
But if you're running a cafe, you realize that it doesn't matter how good the food is. If you treat a consumer, the example I always give jokingly is, if you go out for the best meal of your life, but one of the prongs on your fork is misaligned, it'll ruin the meal.
100%.
In the same way, if you go out for a meal that's fantastic, but something's wrong about this is what bothers me about Gales, actually. There's something wrong with the queuing system. And I actually think that for the money you pay for a coffee in Gales, they should fucking well bring it to the table, right? Rather than making you stand around like a dick, waiting for someone to make you a coffee, they should say, okay, go and sit down, I'll bring you the coffee, because you're then holding up the queue, which makes the queue longer and longer. Is this a deliberate attempt to lengthen the queue so it creates social proof of demand? We don't know. But there's something there about the queuing system at Gales that really riles me.
If you could reverse engineer the success of Gales, what is going... I know lockdown in terms of things kicking off in lockdown and sticking around, sourdough baking was a huge trend that I think...
Yeah.
That's one thing. I definitely think that's part of it. But to have that scale... And the chocolate I sent you...
Yeah,
that is the mocha. So that if you get hot chocolate from Gales, they're using islands.
They use interesting.
Yeah. So so they're like, I don't work directly with them, but like they're great. But what I don't understand, because you never see something that prolific and that premium.
Part of it is that we're changing the way we shop in general. So people tend to. It's worth noting, that bakeries, particularly if you go up north, well, Greg's is a bakery, right? But if you go to most ordinary towns where they're ordinary people, there's a bakery with a massive great queue out the side, okay? It's not like the concept. What they did was they took that and made it posh, actually. If you only got to go to any ordinary town. London doesn't really have much of a bakery culture. But, and actually those bakeries have probably died in the towns where Gales is now successful. But there used to be a bakery which sold cakes, generally very sweet cakes, often very pink, covered in icing, all that sort of stuff. But it's a popular food. That's not there were ample proof points that people like that kind of food. And if you look, to be honest, at an awful lot of trends in food, it's doing basic food really, really well.
Yeah, I think
it's doing, it's doing a... Because,
and doing one thing.
Yeah, and that's the other trend is...
Yes.
Or two things. I love the Australian business. There's a serial entrepreneur who creates these restaurant businesses in Sydney, and the latest one's Wings and Tins. And you just sell two things. You sell wings and you sell tinnies. So you have really interesting beers, lots of variants of chicken wings. That's it.
Wings and Tings. I was thinking of wings. There's Wings and Tings in Brixton. But yeah, they're two separate things. Back to the Rick Rubin thing, just because I think his book, The Creative Act, The Creative Way, whatever it is, I think it's absolutely genius. I think it's like a
way of being. The Creative Act, A Way of Being. I think is the full title.
Yeah, and I think I interviewed a chef called Thomas Straker who's got a restaurant, and he kind of touched upon Rick Rubin. We kind of inadvertently went there, but I was saying what's your approach to creativity? So I read the book, and Rick talks a lot about music producers. And Tom was saying, what you're doing is the being part is taking in every single restaurant you've ever eaten as a chef. Every thing he's from Hereford, which is on the Welsh border.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Taking in all of that, and that all those things pulled in together and then put on the plate. That's originality. It's all your unique things.
Yeah, actually, a lot of it is theft. By which
theft.
I mean is
you
take things and repurpose them.
Yes.
The idea of complete originality is probably that most. As I said, it gets back to the adjacent possible.
Yeah.
That an awful lot of what works is taking what works of something else and then repurposing it, recontextualizing it, reframing it. And, the great thing with chefs is one of the reasons why I think food has become much more interesting is that chefs have become more honest in that they are influenced by the food they themselves eat.
Yeah.
They become a little more selfish. Do you remember who was the Michelin-starred chef who said that he thought the best pizza was
Marcus
the
Waring?
American one? It was Marcus Waring.
I'm interviewing his head chef 2 weeks. Yeah, I find the parallels between marketing and cooking and the creativity. I think that sweet spot is something that fascinates me endlessly.
But also that business of setting the expectation is really interesting. The whole business of how you design a restaurant, you don't necessarily advertise, not in the early days, but the restaurant creates, through everything from typography to furniture to everything else, it creates an expectation, which then has a huge influence, I think, on what you experience.
And also, what Will Guardia says, or Gurdia, is service is black and white, hospitality is colour.
That was weirdly someone who applied for a job, wasn't it? What's the difference between service and hospitality? And the idea is that service can be reduced to an algorithm. It can be reduced to component parts.
Yes.
You see, whereas hospitality is colour. Yeah. It's effectively a very different thing. It's a beautiful answer to the question, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but what do you think he means by that second part? I get the service because service is repeatable. It's consistency.
Well, it's the bit you're trying to repeat, the bit you can kind of measure, the bit where you know whether you got it right or you got it wrong. It's in the realm of kind of, have we met these certain criteria?
Yeah.
And then hospitality is, there's a Japanese concept called Kano theory by a guy who's at the University of Tokyo, who argued he did a lot of work in the Japanese consumer electronics field back in the day. And he argued that products, and you could apply this to services as well, had three attributes. And they're very different, okay? There's table stakes. You have to not fail at anything markedly, okay? So that would be if you bought milk repeatedly, and every time you bought this brand of milk, the carton leaked, right? You wouldn't buy it again. Doesn't matter anything else you've done. It's a waste of time because the carton leaks, okay?
Yep.
And that's what's called, I think, sort of you could call it table stakes or basic attributes. They're what's required to be in the category in the first place. Then there are performance attributes, which are how good are you at doing the thing that the thing is intended to do? How good the milk is within the thing, whether people can tell that it's good milk, whether it has reasonable shelf life, all those things. And generally, there's a linear return on improvement there. And then there's this third component of things, which would be delight attributes, where they're things you weren't even expecting. And as a consequence of not expecting them, you really notice them. And they create a kind of emotional effect, which is out of all proportion to their cost. But they're often quite tangential to the main function of the product. So the example I always give is if you're in consumer electronics, you have a cassette player. And obviously it has to play cassettes and it has to work and it mustn't mangle the tapes and it mustn't catch fire. And it mustn't do any of those terrible things, which would basically be you exit the gene pool at that point. Okay. And then you have the performance attributes of the cassette deck, of things like battery life and sound quality and, wattage through the speakers before they start distorting. Those are the basic performance attributes. And then the delight attribute in a cassette deck was the eject mechanism. So if you won't remember cassettes, but you remember DVDs, do you?
Oh, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's when you
Which is you press eject and it has like a counterbalance damping mechanism and it hisses in a beautiful hydraulic way. You go, ooh, that's lovely. I'd really like that. Nice action, as Alan Partridge once said. On the other hand, if you press eject, it just goes clack. Functionally, there's no difference between the two, okay? There's no reason to spend money on the eject mechanism, but precisely because you can make it lovely and people aren't expecting it, that's where you should spend your money. Now, Will Gadara's point was, I think, about the spoons he chose for the ice cream in the central courtyard of a museum. He found these Italian spoons. Everybody went crazy because they were plastic, but they were particularly lovely, and they cost a fortune. Everyone was saying, do we need to spend X cents per spoon? But as he pointed out, he said, when everybody finished, they couldn't help going on about the spoons. That was the thing they noticed, because it was an area of disproportionate. That's why it's called hospitality beyond reason.
Yes.
There's a certain amount to it, which is service, which you can codify and reduce to an algorithm. And then there's the thing that you weren't expecting.
But why I love restaurants.
And in McDonald's, by the way, that probably isn't anything to do with food. It's like handing the kids balloons, right? Or it's the toy in a Happy Meal, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I actually think for my own personal, I when I'm drunk and I go to the service, I always go to the Wandsworth Roundabout. For that expectation.
That's bizarre. That Wandsworth Roundabout, it's like a little bit of Los Angeles has just descended on London.
I don't understand.
Completely bizarre thing.
Why you know, the arches are like totemic. They're like up like that. It is kind of like that cathedral of consumption.
It is. Yeah.
I'm like, I mean, when I'm fucked, I'm like looking at it going, oh my God, it's like, I feel like I'm getting pulled into the mothership of gluttony.
Because you live in Surrey, do you? So you drive out of London that way.
I used to live in Fulham.
I used to live in Fulham.
Yeah,
okay,
and then all my mates live in sort of Battersea. So I'm always round that part of London. So it's like the perfect place to go. But what I love the surprise and delight, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, when the chips are in the bag and it feels like there's an overflow of chips. Yep. I don't know. Five Guys is the extreme example.
The extra scoop.
Yeah, it's the extra scoop. But that does something to you. And also, like, I think the surprise and delight is the wonderful selection of sauces you can get. Yeah. I think McDonald's sauces are the best. The barbecue, the ketchup,
well, of course,
curry sauce is fantastic.
KFC now does it with the extra hot one, doesn't it? So you've got a choice of those when you have chicken dips.
Yes.
Yeah, they've got an extreme one, and they've got barbecue, and you typically get some sort of sweet chili thing, don't you?
Yeah.
But those things are exactly that. It's that you know, and actually, you can have a meal that's ruined because they forget to put the sauces in the bag.
Oh, well, I've had that numerous times.
It's rather like the most failed attempt to create a low budget own brand version of a product was, I think, Sainsbury's in the 1980s produced their own version of the pot noodle, okay, which was called something like Noodle Pot or whatever it was, you know, and it was the same packaging, but there was no sachet. And you just opened the lid of this thing and it was just like you'd been cheated. You know, you felt completely bereft.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of the pot noodle is that weird flavor sachet that you put on the top, because that creates the yin and the yang of the whole thing.
It's the alchemy.
I never thought I'd be talking about the Buddhist union of opposites in a pot noodle, but that's the alchemy of the thing. If the pot noodle had never had that sachet, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. The sachet of the pot noodle is their kind of version of hospitality.
But the other reason I love food is like there's basically every single touch point. There's a unique story to tell.
Yeah.
But I think the thing I've listened is how Guinness turned their bug into a feature. The fact it takes ages to serve and is actually a bit of a
bar staff don't like serving Guinness, you know.
But the fact it takes longer psychologically, that is the way you say it turns
into a reward, turn into anticipation, to reframe it.
You've been to Devonshire yet? Have you heard of the Devonshire?
Oh, don't. Everybody yesterday was talking about the Devonshire, which supposedly does the best Guinness in London. And of course, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you sell a lot of Guinness, it's really, really fresh. All this stuff about weird taste you've never had it until you've had it in Dublin is kind of contextual bollocks. But that's my argument, which is why I said you can open a fish restaurant by the sea, is because fish tastes better when you're by the sea. Rosé wine tastes better when you're by the sea. Don't ask me why. But there are a lot of foods which require context to be fully enjoyable.
Oh, it's like food you have on holiday and you bring it back. It's just
no. This is a famous example of someone who was in the Caribbean and bought the rights to a banana liqueur, which while they're in the Caribbean tasted, and Pernod outside France tastes like shit.
Yeah.
Okay, Ricard Pernod. You drink them outside a French cafe. It's fantastic. You go buy a litre bottle to take it home. You won't drink it for 5 years. And the same thing happened with this person who bought the rights to this banana liqueur. They took it back and invited their friends round to South London with great fanfare, saying, "You won't believe it, I bought the rights to this drink. I think it's the most magical thing." And they all basically sipped it and said, "This is disgusting."
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work in London.
Yes.
You see? And when I say that when you're by the sea, it would make sense if this were an evolutionary adaptation, though it might not be. Okay, so I asked the question, this is the question I always had as a mock question for business school students. Why are there more fish restaurants by the sea? And what you might call the black and white answer is, low cost of distribution, access to raw materials, etc. But quite a lot of that stuff's probably gone all the way to Billingsgate and come all the way back again, right?
Yeah.
It's not really anything like, we've got really wonderful supplies of fish necessarily. It's simply that when you're by the sea, you feel fish and chips by the sea just tastes a lot better than fish and chips in an inland park.
Yeah,
and that's just how it is.
It's like imagine having a Guinness in a Costa coffee cup.
Yeah,
it's the same. Same
thing.
Yeah, same thing.
I mean, it's interesting. They've put a lot of attention into designing that pint glass, isn't it? The Guinness pint glass.
Well, and also have you seen that? Which I don't know if is a load of absolute bollocks.
Oh, no, the ultrasonic pour with the Guinness nitro
Yeah,
surge.
what's your take on that?
Have I seen it? I've owned one. I bought one for my daughter, who's 22. My proudest achievement as a parent, nothing to do with their educational attainment, is the fact that both my daughters drink beer. And they're really into beer, because I'm not spending the rest of my life buying the little fuckers rosé.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And so I'm really proud of that. And one of my daughters actually is a major Guinness drinker. Absolutely loves it.
Yeah, it's the best.
And I'm so proud of that. But I actually bought her a nitro surge for Christmas.
But did you? But what? So that I haven't actually.
It's first of all, it makes pouring a joy, and someone's reviewed it and said it's as good as a bad pub pint. Now, actually, that's not bad, actually, at home. I think that's a bit unkind. I think it's better than that, because it does recreate the whole tactile experience to within a fairly high degree of fidelity, I think. The Nitro Surge, I'm a big fan.
Why do you think... So Guinness have now become the most selling pint, I think it was last year.
Well, the other big
what
success...
happened that? Why did Guinness... It's been around for years.
Maybe. They've always wrestled with an interesting problem, which is it's actually the least calorific beer. And yet, because of its dense nature, everybody assumes it's the most calorific beer.
Yes.
So it may be in part that message has got through. But you've also got the zero alcohol Guinness, which is really, really interesting.
That's delicious.
Now, here's a good tip. The can of Guinness zero alcohol, okay, is slightly less than a pint. If you go to the Royal Cinque Ports Golf Club, or Cinque Ports, no one knows how to pronounce it, in Deal, and you ask for a pint of non-alcoholic Guinness, because golf, if you think about it, golf courses, most people drive to a golf club, so there's a limit to how much you can drink if you don't want to wrap your car around a tree. And so they sell quite a lot of the zero-alcohol Guinness. And then what they do is they pour the whole pint of zero-alcohol Guinness, and they say, do you want me to top that up from the tap so you get the full head? And I actually told Guinness about this, because I said that's a really important behaviour, because first of all, the zero alcohol Guinness is a very, very good approximation of the taste of a Guinness. What it is about zero alcohol beer that it's finally got good in the last few years, absolutely fascinating.
What I find interesting, so Matt Ridley's got this thing which is about two ideas having sex. You know that? Have you? I love that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about...
He's written The Red Queen, he's written The Rational Optimist, he's written Evolutionary Ideas.
Yeah.
He's written that, my friend,
I think,
Sam Tatum, he's written, what is it? How innovation works. Or
I think there's two ideas having sex right now. Which is...
The combinatorial genetics, yeah.
But as in the profusion or the propulsion or the increase, I should say... Proliferation, there you go, thank you. In wearable tech, Whoops, is basically having sex with alcohol-free beer. Because what's happening is...
Go on, hit me with this.
Well, basically what's happening is...
I hadn't connected those two.
Well, yeah, so basically... So the fact that people are now, due to podcasts like Chris's, like Stephen Bartlett's, wearing wearable tech, they are realising now, and they are tracking how much... Even 2 beers is completely fucking their sleep. So they're now not looking to have beers.
This is really interesting.
And then obviously Lucky Saint, I'll pick that as a brand, for example.
That kind of was the chapel down in terms of opening up the market, wasn't it?
Yeah, Lucky
Yeah,
Saint, yeah.
Lucky Saint,
So what
yeah.
they've done is so these ideas are not meaning to have sex with each other, but they are, right? And then what I mean by that is then Lucky.
Well, you also have the huge reduction in alcohol. I mean, Gen Z doesn't drink much and doesn't have much sex. That's
Yes.
the weird things about Gen Z.
Yes, that's another kind of ancillary part to this,
Yeah.
I think. But then what Lucky Saint are doing is, so we solve this problem, which means you get more sleep by wearing, when you track your sleep, you have 2 Lucky Saints instead of 2 pints, you sleep better, you train better, right?
Yeah.
Lucky Saint have then realized with their marketing is, okay, let's not try and be a beer. Let's slide into this lifestyle. So they have run clubs. So they're
By the way, interesting
they're a beer
point.
brand that thinks like
No
Lucozade.
one will ever make a success of alcohol-free wine, in my opinion. And I always intrinsically think that a lot of people actually prefer beer to wine, but pretend to prefer wine for reasons of looking sophisticated, or because in a restaurant it's served to you in a big bottle which everybody shares, so you might as well tuck in. But I've always had this hunch that 30% of the population, particularly the male population, but not exclusively, often end up drinking wine in circumstances where, left to their own taste buds, they'd be drinking beer. And I think it's proven now that you can get people enthusiastic about alcohol-free beers. But I'd be interested to see. I'd be surprised to see alcohol-free wine making a success.
I know a guy who's got a brand. I think it could. It's more the way you'd work is.
I'd be happy to be proved wrong.
You
by
know,
the way.
but so I think where it works again is that middle of the road. So he's actually called it Wednesday Domain, which is you want. So he basically says on Wednesday,
Yeah,
you want to crack open a bottle of wine.
got it.
But so he's owning that one day of the week. Thursday you'll go out for fucking
Yeah, because Thursday's a new Friday.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I think it could work there, but that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, the middle of the road. There'll be people who may have 1 or 2 glasses of this.
I was in Soho last Thursday. It was like fucking Hogarth. You know, it was like
Where were you
total
in Soho?
mayhem. Well, I was riding through it in a taxi mostly because I'd met some people at a restaurant there.
Where did you go?
Manzi's, which was very, very good. It's owned by the people who own the Wolsey.
Oh, nice.
And it was really, really good. I was very impressed, actually. And there I had a vegetarian main course, interestingly.
What did you have?
It was a kind of nest of things. It was kind of vegetables, kind of tempura vegetables with a kind of a really fantastic thing. But it was complete, like, you know, I mean, it was... it was kind of drunken mayhem on a Thursday. Friday, I imagine, is now quite quiet, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the whole working from home thing.
What are some of your favourite? So back just closing that loop. So I think whether they're meant to or not, I think whether they're having sex
So
or
it
not.
really does, booze really does fuck with your sleep.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't wear those
No.
woots. I go through periods where I don't drink, and then when I get absolutely hammered most days, it's like I'm quite extreme. But that's how I work.
There's an argument that that's actually a better way to be, that actually giving your liver a rest. In other words, also, if you have long periods where you don't drink, it's much harder to develop a dependency.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
So there is an argument that's what we called it 3 total. We never got it off the ground. It was our branding idea, which was the idea that people should be 3 total, which is you don't drink for 3 days in a row every week.
Yeah.
It's much easier than counting units. And also, for obvious reasons, it's much more practical because...
Well, that's basically what I do. When I'm drinking, I'll take
When you
3
drink, you
days
drink a
off,
lot,
and then
yeah.
I like it, but I also like periods. But I think those two completely different industries are helping each other out massively. What if you could have like 2 food ideas to have sex? That's quite a weird way of saying it. Or like 2
that's
with
a great question.
2
Because
ideas.
you've got to be careful, because the general idea of fusion runs up against a mental thing called the jack of all trades heuristic.
Right.
Which is, if you just do Malaysian food, you're going to do pretty good Malaysian food. If you do like Malaysian Mexican fusion, people tend to assume that you're a not very good Mexican restaurant combined with a not very good Malaysian restaurant.
Yeah.
So you've got to be very careful. But in ideas having sex, okay, in food...
Or 2 opposing things that could help each other out, like Lucky Saint and Whoop, essentially kind of having an affair, maybe not having sex.
Yeah, because actually technology, and this is where the adjacent possible comes in, technology is often dependent for its adoption on something else. So I made this point, which I've never heard made before, but I think it's worth making, which is that you couldn't really have had the growth in the railways in Britain in the 1850s if you hadn't had the penny post being invented in 1840. Because you can't just turn up at someone's house 70 miles away and say, "Hi, I'm here to stay for 3 days." If you hadn't had the invention of the post so people could actually make arrangements with each other economically, then the railways might not have worked. Now, maybe that's bollocks. Someone will tell me, no, we had no. But fundamentally, quite often you need one thing to be invented and then adopted for another thing to actually come of age. It's rather like we asked the question, why is it the wheeled suit? They put wheels on suitcases after they'd put a man on the moon. One of them seems comparatively simple. The other one is obviously unbelievably complicated engineering endeavor. Why did nobody think of putting wheels on suitcases before 1975 or whatever? Well, actually, it turns out that things like skateboarding led to huge improvements in inline wheel technology, which just made the whole thing much, much easier to do. Yeah. And obviously the electric car is contingent on battery improvements that were made for mobile phones.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ideas having sex. What would be a really... Okay, one thing I think... Okay, this is a really weird theory, okay? And it's probably not true. But my theory is that Elon Musk's grand plan is to combine Starlink with electric vehicles, with solar panels, with battery storage, okay, to enable people to live off the grid. And you therefore solve the world's housing crisis because once Tesla produces a motorhome, the Tesla Winnebago, right? You don't need to worry about buying a house in London. You can just go and live in one of those. Mm-hmm. And you'll need a base. Now, you'll need a big shed somewhere outside the M25 where you keep all your shit, right? But you can go and buy, 15 acres of woodland for like 30 or 40,000 pounds, not far from a railway station. You keep an electric bicycle. You charge that thing up with a bit of solar and the occasional trip to the BP Pulse charging station, right? You can run your Nespresso machine, your oven, your microwave, your big telly off that 200 kilowatt hour battery that's underneath your Tesla Winnebago. You've got your Starlink thing connecting you to the phone network. All he needs to do is produce a sort of microwave toilet that deals with your waste and your effluvium. And actually, you could tank the world's property market by allowing people to go nomadic. That's my weird theory, that actually, a bit like, you remember in Goldfinger, the guy had that plan, which is buy up a lot of gold and then nuke Fort Knox. So all of the world's gold, 90% of the world's gold would be radioactive for 70 years. So his gold would now become 10 times as valuable. That was Goldfinger's plan in the film anyway. Can't remember what the plan was in the book. Now, my secret dream is that Elon Musk has actually done a massive short on the world's residential and commercial property market, okay, on the basis that once you're on wheels, you don't need planning permission. So you can buy your little woodland with your little road going in, and you can go and park your Winnebago there, and you can go and live there for a fraction of the cost that you're spending on rent for some shitty bedsit in Clapham.
Yes, yeah. No, I think it's almost like the extreme version of what
So motorhomes and electric vehicles strike me as really, really interesting as an idea as having sex, because the fully electrified motorhome is a serious, you don't have all that problem with generators and all that shit.
Final thing, mate, because I know you've got your...
So, okay, I'm just trying to think about... No, don't worry, I've got a bit of time. I'm just thinking about ideas having sex. I'm wondering, in a food context, is there something that's fundamentally missing?
So, this is not necessarily missing, but whilst you think, there's a restaurant called, not Jolene, Angelina, which I highly recommend going to in Dalston, which is a fusion that should not work, but works fucking charm. Italian and Japanese. So they will do the most fresh Italian.
There's a restaurant in Westerham called Bissy's Bites, which is Jamaican Italian.
Wow.
And as she describes it, he's Italian, his wife is Jamaican.
So what would they have on that? That's a wild fusion.
Actually, she said he's the culinary genius. I just add the requisite amount of spice. But she's doing herself an injustice because the various patties and things are really fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's. I think where it gets interesting in terms of having sex is how, or what's had sex already is technology and food. So self-service is an example where
there's something missing. Indian food, the greatest food in the history of the world.
Yeah, you know, Gymkhana got 2 stars now.
It's got 2 stars. So fuck, I won't be able to get in now. But I used to go there. The set lunch was an absolute bargain.
I need to get there. Yeah.
There's something with Indian food in now. Obviously, at the high end, Dishoom's done it.
Yeah.
In scaling it. There's something that has to be possible in terms of scaling Indian food.
Didn't they have Bombay Bicycle Club, which was the version of that?
Well, that only got to about 3 or 4 outlets, didn't it? I thought.
Yeah, I don't know.
Weirdly, I went to something called Bombay Bicycle Club in the United States once, but I don't know whether that was whether they'd bought the brand or something.
But do you think deep down psychologically the story and almost that consistency of the promise? You know what we were talking about earlier is we're so used to our local curry house, a bit like I know. Like
we're so used to our local
bakery.
Want it to become part of a chain.
Yeah, whereas that's the genius of Dishoom. But what Dishoom do?
I actually love Indian food from the fact that you could be anywhere in Britain, or indeed in Fuerteventura, as I was last week, and have a fantastic Indian meal. I think, the fact that you're only,
Lisbon,
with a bit
Lisbon,
of TripAdvisor or whatever, the fact that you're only 8 miles away from somewhere fantastic is just joyous.
Yeah, I think...
So let's abandon that then and say that it's a fundamentally localized artisan food. Okay, I'll keep thinking about this because it's a really interesting question. But also, are there new technologies? So I think the business of... so I was talking to some people at Berkeley who are food scientists, and they say that actually a lot of the work in preserving food was done by NASA. Okay. In other words, space meals, and a lot of it's been done by the military, which is MRE, meals ready to eat, which is the military category. And you can actually have really, really good food that's preserved with a really long shelf life. And it tastes delicious. The problem you face is the problem you face with frozen food with Iceland, which is because it's more efficient, it's cheaper, and therefore people think it's down market.
I've got an idea that 2 things that could have sex. This is this Canadian.
So long preserved, very high quality food is a really interesting.
So that's person 1 or idea 1. Idea 2, and this is this Canadian couple I met out in Costa Rica. They actually own one of these stores. Is why frozen food in the UK has such a stigma with it, right?
Yes.
Whereas...
Not in France. Picard in France, which you can also buy on Ocado, is the French Marks and Spencer's ready meal. It's a traiteur, but it's all frozen.
Yes.
And the French... So my French colleagues, when I told them they could buy Picard food on Ocado, they practically all hugged me.
Oh, really?
Because it's like Brits missing Marks and Spencer's, okay? And so, but it's frozen. And the French, surgelé, frozen food doesn't have the stigma. And it does in the UK. And it's a huge tragedy because in many ways you preserve the nutrients better.
This is it. Jamie Oliver has badgered on like frozen fruit is better.
Yeah.
The actual quality is better and it's flash frozen. So 2 ideas. I'm just thinking, why is someone not creating...
The Ivy does that thing, doesn't it? Which is the frozen fruit with hot white chocolate sauce poured over it.
Yes.
Which is one of their sort of staple puddings, which is just magically good because it's all the yin and the yang thing going on.
Yes.
But no, I'm a big fan of frozen fruit, and I think that there are a lot of foods which freeze really, really well, and I think we've vilified the freezer.
Well, Iceland in terms of Iceland, we've got a chain at the bottom not raising the floor.
You've got Cook, of course, which is an interesting chain. That's frozen food.
Yeah,
that's a Kent-based company again.
That's more like frozen ready meals. The idea I think is almost you have you walk into like a Planet Organic and a Whole Foods. So you have the premiumization, almost like a frozen Trader Joe's or a frozen Planet Organic. No food waste, probably cheaper for the consumer.
Yeah.
It's like
supply chain, no problems there.
That would absolutely win. I don't know why that's not in the UK, but I think we're...
we actually worked with a company called Wrap, and one of the things we did was we actually had loaves of bread where the packaging was half eat me, freeze me.
Oh.
Because nobody knows, particularly young people, don't have a clue. One of the things you've got to realise is that, and I'll defend the advertising industry and the importance of it in that way, is that there's extraordinary widespread ignorance about all kinds of things, okay?
Yeah.
And so I remember someone with a degree getting really pissed off because someone came and stayed the night with them and without asking permission charged their mobile phone off the plug. Okay, now that's like 0.5p, okay, right? there are a lot of people who don't know that heat uses a lot of electricity and lights doesn't use very much. So they'll go around turning off lights absolutely furiously, but then they'll leave a 3-bar electric heater on, okay? You know, or they don't worry about the oven or the kettle or any of that stuff. People haven't got a clue about this stuff. And, you know, you have problems like things like heat pumps where it doesn't seem to make sense that it's 5 times more efficient to heat a home with a heat pump than it is with a boiler. And so you get this, and nobody knows what food freezes, genuinely. You know, I mean, it's a tragedy that when you buy a freezer, there isn't a bloody book in it which says this is the stuff you can freeze. And actually, it's a, you know, extraordinary way of minimizing food waste. Probably we're also too paranoid because you have this freeze on day of purchase, best before nonsense, which is actually, nobody knows the difference between a best before date and a use by date, by the way, and they're completely different. You know, best before date on a can.
Yeah, that's
so one of the things I tried to propose. I had a very good friend who said you could reduce food waste. What was it? A colleague of mine by just putting the day of the week on the use by date, used by Wednesday, and people would look at it on Friday and go, "Yeah, that's okay."
You know your friend, that restaurant.
I don't know the fucking day. I don't know what today is. Is it the 6th of March? Is it the 4th of March? Okay, right.
You're gonna have to go.
Okay, no. I've got 2 more minutes. I'll be fine. And then you have the thing where what it should say is best before. It should actually say best before June 24, right? Because if you say best before June the 24th, that suggests a degree of specificity where somehow on June the 25th the thing becomes unedible and will give you botulism. But I mean, you'd be fine in July, fine in August, right? And so by not giving a margin of error around the best before date, people are throwing things out which shouldn't be.
Well, also, it can last for longer. I don't know why, just quickly on the ideas thing, is why more restaurants don't, they've got the brand, they've got the credentials, why they don't freeze, like I would buy from Gymkhana a frozen...
Gymkhana does its own range of curry sauces.
Curry sauces, but I would buy a frozen curry from them. A bit like your...
Well, this is the theory that you could do this with meals ready to eat. You could actually have the authentic thing, and they now know how to preserve it. The problem is a marketing problem. It's not. It's like Jamie Oliver and the frozen food. It's a marketing problem. It's not a technological problem, and that is often the case. There are lots of things which technology has solved, like Zoom and video conferencing. Right? Zoom basically solved the technology problem, but it took a pandemic to actually create the behavior. And so I think with an awful lot of food tech, the problem is actually gaining widespread acceptance and adoption. It's not actually coming up with the bloody technology. Frozen food in the UK, unlike, say, France, is rarely seen, cook being an exception, as a premium form of food. But actually, it's probably the best way to preserve really good food.
Yeah. It's a status thing, ultimately.
Ultimately, it comes down to what do people think of me for doing this? And I must stop now because I better go to...